Hero of the Otherworldly Castle. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 126, Invincible Force. The four knights looked at the army formation in front of them, which did not react at all. They knew the determination of the Zyre army and returned to the rear of the main formation in dismay. Not long after, Lusu looked at the sky and reported, "General, the time is up." Deking nodded slightly, indicating that he understood. Then his face became serious and he ordered, "Beat the drums." The order was given, and the soldiers executed it. Dang dang dang. The war drums lined up in a row, under the rhythmic hammering of several sturdy men. The drums made a deafening sound. Under the roar of the war drums in the Zyre army formation, the army on the opposite side had a visible commotion. Deking didn't care about the commotion of the other side. According to his own command rhythm, he then ordered, "Order. Prepare the siege artillery and shrapnel shells of the entire army." As the military order was issued, whether it was the artillery in the regular battalion in the front, the heavy battalion, or the exclusive artillery formation in the rear, all began to load gunpowder and shrapnel shells. Prepare the shrapnel shells, 2 packs of propellant, 2 kilometers away. This is the specific order given by the executive officers of the siege artillery to the subordinate artillery. At the gun position of a siege artillery near the back row, a soldier picked up 2 propellant packs wrapped in oil paper, tore open the reserved opening, and poured 2 packs of chestnut black gunpowder from the muzzle into the barrel. After pouring, he also crumpled the oil paper into a ball and put it into the barrel. Another soldier holding a long push rod immediately used the push rod to poke hard into the barrel. Another soldier held a black shell with several short protrusions on it in both hands. The soldier threw the protruding side into the barrel, and the soldier holding the push rod continued to move forward and poke the barrel hard. A soldier behind the artillery moved a flintlock, then poured a small wooden spoon of bulk gunpowder into the small hole under the mechanism, then took the long rope connected to the flintlock and retreated a few meters to the left rear. The other soldiers also returned to their positions and prepared to reload. This was ready for the launch, and the whole process took less than 20 seconds. "General, the siege artillery shrapnel is ready to launch." The messenger saw the flags of preparation sent back by various artillery positions and immediately reported to Deking. These messengers are also part of the brigade. The infantry brigade has a brigade headquarters, with drum and bugle corps, messengers, general guards, general flag guards and other functional organizations. Counting Deking and Lusu, the brigade has a total of 200 people. The distance between the two armies is about 3 kilometers. When the Zyre army began to beat the drums and prepare the artillery, the opposing army also launched an attack on the Zyre army under the command of 4 knights. Charge, charge, charge. Under the command of the officers, the armies of the 4 territories changed from a slow trot to a fast run. During the charge, no formation could be seen. The 2 armies were arranged on the hillsides on both sides of the passage, but they were closer to the passage below. The passage here was 2 or 3 kilometers wide. It was no longer a passage, but an open area. It was very good as a battlefield. The commanders of the 2 armies lived on the hillside and could directly see the situation on the battlefield. Deking saw that the enemy had already launched a charge, drew out his sword, swung it forward with force, and ordered, "The main infantry advances." Woo woo woo. The war drums kept the rhythm without stopping, but the horns began to call with Deking's orders. Regular battalion, infantry advance, heavy battalion, infantry advance under the command of the secondary officers. The infantry of the 2 battalions of the infantry brigade began to advance slowly, always maintaining a stable speed, advancing forward in an orderly manner without fast or slow. Boom, boom, boom. The long-range infantry was in front, and the melee infantry was behind, maintaining the same speed, neat steps, and pressing towards the enemy with unstoppable momentum. Boom, boom, boom. The sound of footsteps falling at the same time shook the earth, startling the birds within a radius of 10 miles, and the beasts fled in all directions, but none of these birds and beasts dared to approach the battlefield. Since the era of tribal group living, The ancestors of China have been fighting against nature and have opened up one living space after another with the spirit of overcoming difficulties. It was also from that time that China's enemies were largely left to themselves. The 4 knights of the Territory Coalition Army were extremely shocked at this time. They looked at the Zaire Army's neat advancement as if it were one person and the unstoppable momentum, and they all felt incredible. Just this momentum made the 4 people feel a little uneasy, but now the arrow has been released and they can only bite the bullet in order to continue charging. They can only hope that the opposite army is a fake, and they will know if they can beat it or not after a try. Otherwise, the news that they were frightened by the enemy's momentum and fled would definitely be reported back, and then they would become the joke of the whole continent. General, the enemy is 2 kilometers away. Lu Su rode his warhorse and stood beside Deking, watching the enemy charge expressionlessly and calmly estimating the distance between the 2 armies. Deking hummed, waved his sword again, and roared and ordered, "Fire the siege artillery." The syllables of the word fire were roared out by him, especially the lingering sound of the word shoot echoed for a long time, as if he wanted to convert the sound into artillery shells to attack the enemies of Zaire Kingdom. The military order was given, and the flags and horns were waved and shouted, "Fire! Fire! Fire!" The orders from the frontline officers came one after another and spread one by one. Each soldier holding the gun rope pulled hard according to the order. Boom. 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 This was no longer the neat, earth-shaking footsteps, but the more earth-shaking sound of artillery. This is the power from science and technology and wisdom. It is the first time that they have officially demonstrated it in front of the local civilization. I wonder if they can bear this power from another civilization. On this side of the passage, a burst of fire and smoke emerged, drifting with the wind, like a fairyland. On the other side, 36 groups of fire emerged from the crowd of charging enemies, accompanied by broken limbs, flying and splashing all over the field, like hell. 4 or 5 seconds after the artillery was fired, Deking and Lu Su heard the sound of the shells exploding. Continue the siege artillery. Prepare the field artillery shells. Deking was also estimating the distance between the 2 armies and the speed of the other side's charge. After a rough calculation, the enemy will enter within 1 kilometer in a few minutes at this speed. In the roar of the artillery, the enemy was already panicked, but under the terrified command of the knight, they continued to charge. Deking continued to give orders, infantry advance and prepare for battle. Heavy cavalry return to their positions. Light cavalry maneuver to our 2 wings. As Deking issued a long series of military orders, the inactive cavalry in the rear began to move under the transmission of war drums, horns, and flags. The speed of 4 legs is incomparable to that of 2 legs. The advancing infantry of the 2 battalions stopped and stood still, lining up in formation facing the charging enemy. The 566 light cavalry of the entire brigade were divided into 2 formations, one on the left and one on the right to maneuver to the 2 wings of the infantry, guarding the safety of the 2 wings of the infantry while being able to launch an attack at any time. The 350 heavy cavalry of the entire brigade, one formation, maneuvered to the gap reserved between the 2 battalions and also stopped. But looking at the movements and expressions of these heavy cavalry, they were already ready to charge. Chapter 127, Overwhelming. The main combat force of the whole brigade is infantry, and cavalry is only auxiliary combat force, which is why it is called an infantry brigade. And conventional means that it can be formed on a large scale. But with the current national strength of Xiaguo, it is impossible to form a conventional infantry brigade, not for other reasons, but only for the 81 field artillery and 36 siege artillery. With so many artillery, I don't know how much manpower and material resources it will take to manufacture them. To give a simple example, a field artillery is 600 kilograms, and a siege artillery is 1,200 kilograms. Just these more than 100 artillery pieces require 91,800 kilograms of special artillery steel. Such special artillery steel cannot be smelted by the existing smelting workers in Xiaguo. It's not that there is no technical information, but there are not enough technicians. The current smelting plant can only practice again and again, and the steel used for the 10 trial produced artillery at Cheyenne Pass is the latest achievement. The others are the heavy infantry, which is as high as a formation, 2 battalions and a squadron, with a total of 602 heavy infantry. These soldiers are not so easy to find. If this type of soldier is abandoned, and 2 types of artillery are abandoned, then with the national strength of Zaire state, a weakened infantry brigade of 3,500 people can still be formed, but the combat effectiveness of such a weakened infantry brigade is not even 1/3 of that of a regular infantry brigade. It costs a huge amount of money, manpower, and stagnates development, just to form such an army with little combat effectiveness. It is better not to form it. Now, the 4 territories have used their lives to experience how powerful the combat effectiveness of the full version of the regular infantry brigade is. Deaking saw that the enemy braved the bombardment of 12 rounds of siege artillery and rushed to a range of nearly 1,000 meters without collapsing. He was also a little surprised by the enemy's resilience. But accidents are accidents, and the orders that should be given will continue to be issued. Order. Field artillery shrapnel shells are fired. Siege artillery is equipped with solid bullets. Heavy cavalry is ready to charge. On the other side, the 4 knights were already very scared, listening to the sound of boom like thunder from the thick black pipes behind the enemy formation. Looking at the fireballs that rose from time to time in their own army, and the broken limbs and arms that flew in the air, they were all terrified. Looking at the unprecedented attack method on the opposite side, the discipline of strict discipline, and the imposing army, they all forgot to command the army. Now even if they were asked to command the army, they couldn't command it. Especially after rushing across an invisible line, a burst of smoke came out of the black and thick pipes on the opposite side, covering the enemy's position. Then there was a more intensive thunder. The 4 knights stared blankly and lifelessly at their army scattering and fleeing in the dense fireballs. Boom. Suddenly, several soldiers in front of Knight Bobby fell down wailing. A closer look showed that all the wailing soldiers had broken legs. The wildebeest that Knight Bobby was riding was startled and almost fell him off. After finally calming down the wildebeest under him, he saw a black round ball with green smoke embedded in the slope in front of him. Knight Bobby didn't see what happened, but the first knight saw it clearly from the side. It was the black ball that jumped and rolled over, breaking the legs of the soldiers. Looking at the bloody thighs of the soldiers, the blood was pouring out. After a few breaths, the wailing of the soldiers became weaker, and soon, the soldiers were all silent. Looking at the battlefield again, in addition to the soaring fireballs, there were also black and red shadows rolling on the battlefield. Wherever these shadows went, the soldiers on his side, if they were lucky, would have their hands and feet broken, and those with less luck would either have no head or their whole body turned into pieces. Several people shuddered together, and then looked at the black ball embedded in the earth slope in front of Knight Bobby. Only then did they know what those shadows were, and then they were scared, especially Knight Bobby. He looked like he had just come out of the water, and his whole body was covered with sweat. Ah! Run! The young knight screamed in shock, letting the others know what they should do most now, run for their lives. Lucky Bobby, the soldiers in front of him used up the last bit of kinetic energy of the ricochet bullet, and dealt him a fatal blow. But the other soldiers on the battlefield, who were fleeing, were not so lucky. Deaking looked at the fleeing enemy troops with satisfaction, and happily issued several orders that made the enemy even more uncomfortable. Order. Stop firing the artillery. Heavy cavalry charge the assembled enemies. Light cavalry split the fleeing enemies. Infantry deal with the enemies charging the formation. Clear orders came one after another. The artillery that received the order to stop firing all emitted green smoke. The soldiers immediately poured clean water on them, and the water mist that was steaming due to the sudden high temperature filled the fields. After receiving the order, the heavy cavalry began to charge under the loud command of the officers in the formation. Although there were only 350 heavy cavalry charging, the movement was not small at all. There was only one result for the enemies blocking the heavy cavalry's charge route turned into a pile of minced meat. The charge of the light cavalry was like a gust of wind. They followed the gaps that could be seen everywhere in the enemy formation, just like performing horsemanship, and split the enemy wherever they could. The remaining infantry changed formation. The Malay soldiers marched forward along the passages between the long-range infantry ranks. came to the front of the long-range infantry, set up heavy shields, erected round shields, set up long spears, held their weapons tightly, and looked forward to the enemy's charge. But the enemy was not a fool. These soldiers knew that they were not easy to mess with at a glance, and few dared to rush over. But there were still panicked enemies who were forced over by the cavalry, and the result waiting for them was of course only a dead end. There were not many of the 6,000 enemy troops destroyed by artillery, not even 1/10 of the total, but there were many enemy troops frightened by artillery. There are at least more than 4,000 enemies still running around on the battlefield. In order to maximize the killing of the enemy's living force, D. King ordered the cavalry to attack. The infantry brigade went out this time to attack and destroy. There are still so many enemies in front of them, and they have no reason to let them go. Except for the enemies, who ran away earlier. The rest of the enemies were divided into several groups by the light cavalry and surrounded. The heavy cavalry looked at the trembling enemies surrounded and showed no mercy. They launched wave after wave of charge until all the enemies in the encirclement were eliminated. The ranged infantry launched precise shooting at the enemies a little further away, but there were not many enemies waiting to be attacked by them. It seemed that it was the turn of the ranged soldiers to play a supporting role in this battle. After the melee soldiers cleaned up the crazy enemies who had no way to escape, they waited for military orders together with the ranged soldiers. Chapter 128. The battle ends. Let the infantry join the clearing sequence. After seeing that there were not many enemies fleeing or charging, D. King immediately gave the order. The infantry of the two battalions just stopped attacking, and the military order followed. According to the military order, the infantry of the two battalions each chose an encirclement and steadily advanced. More than 600 light cavalrymen rushed non-stop. As long as they found a group of enemies with signs of fleeing, they rushed up and chopped them furiously, but before they really chopped the enemy, most of them were shot and killed by the crossbows in their hands. The light cavalry of the infantry brigade are equipped with a crossbow. This crossbow has 3 crossbow arms, 3 crossbow strings, and 3 mechanisms. So this crossbow can load 3 short crossbow arrows at a time. When firing, you can shoot 3 times separately, or you can shoot 3 crossbow arrows at a time. According to the instructions, this crossbow is specially equipped for light cavalry. When the light cavalry launches an attack, the crossbow arrows fired by these crossbows are the first wave of attacks. But because the speed of light cavalry is very fast, if it is other crossbows, they can't shoot a few times during the charge, so there is this kind of hand crossbow with complicated loading, but very good power and shooting speed. With this kind of hand crossbow, coupled with fast mobility, good attack power, and the assistance of heavy cavalry, they can surround and divide the enemy army 2 or 3 times their size with less than 1,000 troops. The combat effectiveness and importance of cavalry can be seen from this, which is much stronger than infantry. But it is also easy to be targeted, as long as there is a trap, a pit, a low wall. Therefore, infantry is the main force on the battlefield, and cavalry can only be auxiliary to a large extent. Just like now, if the infantry does not join the battlefield, the cavalry will soon be unable to hold on. The heavy armor of the heavy cavalry makes their combat endurance far from enough, and it is impossible for the heavy cavalry who are good at explosive power to continue to fight. The long-term mobility of light cavalry also consumes a lot of horsepower and energy. Don't think that, if you run on a warhorse, there is no cavalry. In fact, cavalry is also very tired. As the infantry joined the clearing sequence, in addition to the roaring sound of war horses, there were more tragic shouts of killing on the battlefield. Most of them were from the enemy. First row, raise your guns. Stab, put away your guns. Second row, raise your guns. Stab, put away your guns. Third row, raise your guns. Stab, put away your guns. The spearmen were divided into 3 rows under the command of the officers, and each row had an officer giving orders. They kept stabbing one after another without stopping. Looking at the chaotic enemy in front of them, the soldiers of the infantry brigade did not waver at all. Under the leadership of various officers, they followed the tactics and approached the enemy step by step. Every time the melee soldiers took a step forward in an orderly manner, a row of enemies would be ruthlessly killed on the ground. Facing the cold and ruthless Zaire soldiers, the enemy could only crowd back, but there were people behind them, and they had no way to retreat. They could only face the soldiers in horror and kick the ground hard, trying to get further away. However, in the end, even if they kicked a pit on the ground, they did not get away even a little bit. The enemy could only watch the bloody gun tip pierce into his chest. Feeling the severe pain in his chest, watching his blood spurt out along the blood trough. Feeling the power and heat in his body quickly disappearing, the expression of fear and despair was the last scene of the enemy left in this world. It's not that no enemy launched a counterattack in absolute despair, but what's the use? In front of the army's unified order, these sporadic resistances are not even a wave. The long-range attack soldiers attacked the central area where the enemy gathered, and they were not afraid of accidental injuries, and there would be no accidental injuries. The repeated attacks of the crossbows and strong crossbows made the enemy crowd become sparse, which gave the enemies who were still retreating in front space. They stepped on the bodies of their own people and gathered towards the center again. The next attack was just a repetition. Over and over again, round after round of attacks, advances, and encirclements, until there were no more enemies standing. It's not that no enemies surrendered, but the soldiers of the infantry brigade didn't understand each other's words. Even if they understood, what would it matter? In front of the king's order not to take prisoners, no one dared to disobey, including Deking and Lu Su. Before the expedition, Yang Song said that this time he went out of the city to plunder, destroy, and kill. The soldiers were all holding their breath. These northern barbarians dared to provoke the Xia kingdom without knowing whether to live or die, and angered the king. The most important thing was that they didn't take them, the soldiers who protected their country, seriously. If they don't kill now, when will they kill? If they don't vent their anger now, when will they vent their anger? It wasn't until noon that the battle was over. Next is a tedious time to clean up the battlefield, and it is also the time to make up for it. The soldiers of the elite infantry brigade are not careless. When they clean the battlefield, they are determined not to let it go or miss it. The battle took less than 3 hours, but it took an afternoon to clean the battlefield. During the cleaning of the battlefield, many enemies pretending to be dead were found. The soldiers didn't care. Anyway, they would stab them again, whether they were dead or not. Finally, the enemies were piled together, and then the enemies' clothes were used to ignite the piles of blurred corpses, which turned into a stream of black smoke. In order to prevent the plague, this is necessary. Incineration can save a lot of time for digging pits, and digging pits is not safe. Many beasts have the ability to dig holes, and the probability of plague is very high. At dusk, the soldiers returned to the barracks tiredly, and they were greeted by warm hot porridge, and then there was a rich meal. After a rich meal, the soldiers returned to the tents in an orderly manner to rest, but Deking, Lu Su and other middle and senior officers were not so relaxed. General, this is today's battle report. Lu Su handed a stack of paper to Deking with both hands, and his voice was a little sad. Deking frowned and looked at the battle report in his hand, and said in a heavy voice, the bodies of the fallen soldiers should be properly placed, and the militiamen of the rear security camp should be transported back to the country. The injured should be treated well. Yes, General. Lu Su bowed his head, and accepted the order with a fist, and his voice was also extremely heavy. War. There will be casualties in war. The capture of the southern barbarians last time was not actually a war, it was just a hunt. Even so, many soldiers were injured. The battle report counted the casualties of this battle. 57 people were killed. More than 300 people were injured. Most of the soldiers who died were from cavalry, among which there were more light cavalry, 23 people, and only 9 heavy cavalry, and the rest were all infantry. Most of the injured soldiers were slightly injured, except for a few who fell off their horses and broke their legs. The others were flesh wounds. After bandaging, the minor injuries were not a big problem, and some could even continue to fight. The seriously injured, or those who could not continue to fight, were transported to the interior of the pass by the militia in carriages. There was already a group of doctors waiting for them at the Xianqian Pass. These brave warriors can receive the best treatment here. According to the enemy's statistics, there were no injured enemies, only the number of enemy deaths, more than 5,000. This death ratio is still very scary, close to 1 to 100. With such a result, the fallen soldiers did not come to this world in vain. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. we cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 129, The Other Side's Countermeasures. When Yang Song learned about the death rate, he was not surprised, even though this death was the first time he encountered it. But he was not prepared to blame Deking, because he watched the whole battle on the small map. He also knew that the enemy this time was no longer an uncivilized native. The enemy also had bows and spears, and fighting was far less easy than hunting. So Yang Song was still very satisfied with this battle, but it was a pity for these brave warriors. He was a monarch, and could not follow the warriors to fight the enemy, but he could do something within his ability, and what he could do was more than just a little bit. The medical team at Cheyenne Pass, a bowl of hot porridge after the battle, a rich meal, and timely supplies. The next morning, Deking looked at the piles of ashes that were still smoking, frowned, and ordered, after breakfast, set off immediately. Looking at the battlefield, he remembered the numbers on the battle report, which made him very upset, but he was very calm despite being annoyed, and he knew what to do next. He knew the support from the rear. With the full support of the Lord, Deking and his men could only repay the Lord's kindness with greater results. Yesterday, the 4 knights saw that they were invincible, and were so scared, that they slapped their horses and fled. Fortunately, the battlefield was not far from the city of Kevin's territory, only more than 20 kilometers away. With the remaining bit of rationality, they chose to flee north. As for the situation of the army behind, they had no intention of caring about it. After the 4 knights fled back to the small town with some of their followers, under the suspicious eyes of the city guards, the first knight ordered the guards to close the city gates, and then they fell off the horse exhausted. Quick! Go and inform the Lord. The first knight rested for a while, as if he had thought of something, and shouted loudly at the city guards. Several city guards who surrounded them looked at each other, without speaking or taking action, just waiting for the next words of the knight. They thought to themselves, you didn't even tell us what to notify. What should we say to the Lord? The first knight looked at the indifferent city guards, and became even more furious. He roared, the enemy is almost outside the city, why don't you go quickly? When the city guards heard that the enemy was coming, they knew something was wrong. Immediately, a leader ran to the castle with a look of shock on his face. What? The enemy is outside the city? Did the first knight say that? Kevin had heard thunder in the south not long ago, and he had a bad feeling. Unexpectedly, the enemy really defeated the army guarding the passage in the south. Listening to the city guard's account, the first knight and his men seemed to have escaped for their lives. What about the army outside the city? Thinking of this, Kevin ordered loudly in fear, go quickly. Call all the knights. After receiving the order, the city guards also crawled out of the castle hall in fear. Soon after, everyone in the city knew the news of the defeat in the south, and even more, so that they knew that the enemy was about to come here, and they all panicked. The civilians were panicking about being forcibly conscripted to defend the city, and the powerful were panicking about their lives being in danger. But now the town has closed its gates, and no one can escape. Even if they escape, where can they escape to? In the castle hall, Kevin looked at the 6 knights standing below, 3 of whom belonged to him, and 3 from other territories. First knight, aren't you the first knight under this lord? Tell me, what's going on? Where are the 6,000 troops in the passage? Although Kevin has grey hair, and is not young anymore, he has always been in good health, but he has not felt so good recently. The first knight replied, my lord, there are many people in the army of the southern territory who can summon thunder. I have seen many soldiers burned to death by thunder with my own eyes. If you don't believe it, you can ask them. He pointed to the other 3 knights, and the other 3 knights nodded in agreement when they saw Lord Kevin looking at them. Knight Bobby added, my lord, the enemy can not only summon thunder, but also launch a kind of big iron ball. This iron ball jumps on the ground, and all the soldiers in front of it are smashed to pieces. After saying that, Knight Bobby was scared again, because he was almost killed by such an iron ball. After Kevin confirmed that the words of the first knight were not false, his face turned pale with fear, and he said, what should I do? He didn't say another sentence, that is, surrender. He also thought about asking the other 6,000 troops to help him defend the city, but these soldiers were scattered to various important places in the north and were still intercepting the caravans in the north. The enemy was about to be outside the city, and it was too late for a while. The knights below also knew what Lord Kevin meant, but it was still a bit difficult for them to say the words of surrender in person. After listening to the others' statements, the second knight had been thinking about countermeasures. At this time, he heard the Lord's question, and the other knights did not intend to answer, so he stepped forward and replied, "My lord, I think we should recruit civilians immediately to help defend the city, and the nearby villages should also be recruited. Then we should send people to ask for help from the other 3 territories. As long as we explain how powerful we are, the other lords will definitely help. Although there is no illusion of lips and teeth are cold, they all know that after their allies are defeated, they will not be much better." After hearing that he didn't need to surrender, Kevin hurriedly asked, "Is this okay? Will the other lords really come back to save me?" When Kevin heard that there was hope, he was so anxious that he didn't call himself this lord. The second knight answered confidently, "As long as these 3 knights return to their own territories, and let these knights who have seen the so-called Thunder and Iron Bowl tell the story, I believe that all the lords will know how powerful it is." Although the second knight was talking about countermeasures, he still didn't believe that anyone could summon the so-called Thunder and Iron Bowl, because he only heard the explanations of the other knights, but didn't see it with his own eyes. He thought it was just an excuse for their defeat. Even if there is anything, it is just the enemy's weapon, but they have never seen it. As for the second knight's strategy of asking for help, there is no way. Now the 6,000 troops have been wiped out, and not even 1,000 have escaped. How can they defend the city with this army? When the other 3 knights heard that they were asked to go back, they hurriedly agreed to the plan without Kevin asking, and patted their chests, and said that they would persuade their lords to send troops to rescue. The 3 of them didn't want to stay in this dangerous place at all. They secretly made up their minds to go back and ask their lords to send troops. As long as they defended this small town, they would become safe. As for how many people would die at that time, it was none of their business. Kevin saw hope and became happy. He said, "As long as we defend the city this time, this lord will definitely thank you in the future." After that, Kevin hurriedly asked the 3 to go back quickly so that they could call for reinforcement a moment earlier. Then he asked the second knight to be responsible for the defense and the first knight to recruit civilians. Kevin is fully prepared and is holding his ground, waiting for the arrival of the enemy from the Zaya Kingdom. Chapter 130 Return to the small town. Deking and Lusu led the infantry brigade to continue forward. This time there was no division between the vanguard and the rear army, because the spies in front reported that the enemy had already implemented a strong defense and was ready to defend the city. In less than a day, the entire brigade had arrived outside the city, and there was no siege. It was just divided into 2 parts, lined up on the south and east sides of the city. Because of insufficient troops, they could only attack 2 walls at most. The heavy battalion was in the south of the city, the regular battalion was in the east of the city, and the other 3 separate formations were also in the south of the city. Because the regular battalion had 2 artillery battalions of its own, Deking asked them to feint on the east city, and the rest of the troops were all concentrated in the south of the city for the main attack. "Staff officer, tell me, how should we attack this city?" Deking rode on a warhorse, looking at the setting sun in the west, and asked Lusu with a smile. Lusu was also riding on a warhorse. When he heard Deking's question, he smiled and clasped his fists and replied, "General, such a small city cannot withstand a single blow. A few rounds of artillery fire will suffice." Haha. Deking laughed and said, "Well said. It's getting late today. Let's have a few rounds of salutes to let the people of this small city know our enthusiasm." "That's the best." Lusu touched his beard with his index and middle fingers, and agreed with Deking's statement. Deking's face straightened and he ordered, "Order. Fill the siege artillery with shrapnel shells, aim at the small city, and prepare for 3 rounds." "Yes." The messenger quickly conveyed the order. Because it was just a few rounds of artillery bombardment, it was not considered a siege, so Deking did not order the drums to be beaten and the trumpets to be blown. "Report to the general. The siege artillery is ready." In less than a minute, the messenger reported to Deking that the siege artillery was ready and was just waiting for the order to fire. Deking did not let the artilleryman wait for long, nor did he let the enemy wait for long. He waved his right hand in the direction of the small town and shouted loudly, "Fire! The general has ordered. Fire!" The messenger waved the flag, rode on the warhorse, shouted the general's order, and ran at high speed to pass the order. Fire! The order to fire first sounded from the position of the siege artillery brigade in the south. Boom boom boom. The 18 siege artillery finally lived up to his name and began the first bombardment of the city. Fire! Then the order to fire sounded from the position of the siege artillery brigade in the east. Boom boom boom. Another 18 siege artillery bombardment, firing 18 shrapnel shells at the small town in front of them. After a while, bursts of dense explosions sounded in the city, followed by billowing black smoke rising into the sky. In less than 20 seconds, the second round of artillery bombardment began again. Boom boom boom. The explosions in the town rang again, and there was more black smoke. From a distance, it looked as if the whole town was burning. After 3 rounds of artillery bombardment, Deking ordered the entire army to return to the camp and prepare for the formal siege the next day. The infantry brigade outside the city went to rest, but the people in the city were not having a good time. To be precise, they were all scared out of their wits. Kevin was discussing with several of his knights how to defend the city in the afternoon when he heard the city guards report that an army appeared in the south and east of the city, and it seemed that they were going to attack the city. After hearing the report from the city guards, the people in the castle hall began to panic. Before they could calm down from the news, they heard bursts of thunder and explosions. The sound of the explosion was like in their ears, the earth trembled, and a lot of dust fell from the ceiling, which made them panic, and they didn't know how to deal with it. My lord, this is the enemy's sky thunder. The first knight was the first to react, and reported to Kevin, who was trying to get under the seat. Kevin, who couldn't find a gap under the seat, heard the first knight's report, and fell on the ground, asking in panic, "Is this the sky thunder summoned by the enemy you said? Why is it so terrible?" Kevin's words had just fallen, and before the first knight could answer, boom. An explosion seemed to sound in his ears, shaking everyone in the hall dizzy and tinnitus. It took a long time to react. Ah. Help. Run. The sky thunder is coming again. When everyone in the hall returned to normal, they found that the roar of the sky thunder had stopped at some point. The first knight looked out along the entrance of the hall, and the 2 guards guarding the hall had already fallen to the side, without a sound. A big pit appeared in the yard outside the hall at some point. The noisy and crying sounds outside the castle made those sitting in the castle hear them very clearly. They waited for a while, and only breathed a sigh of relief when they saw that the enemy did not summon the thunder again, but they still did not dare to leave the castle. Who of you go outside to see what's going on and what's going on outside? Kevin hid behind the throne, poked his head out, and shouted to the people hiding in the corner of the hall, but the people in the hall seemed to have not heard the words of the Lord, and they were all indifferent. Go quickly. What are you all standing there for? Seeing that no one listened to him, Kevin was very angry and shouted, "You dare not listen to my words? My lord is not dead yet." There was no way. In the eyes of others, the knights had to walk out of the hall together, bypass the big pit in the yard, and continue to walk out of the castle. At this time, the second knight no longer thought about it. He was also very frightened. He didn't expect that the enemy really had weapons like thunder. This made him very worried. He was worried about how to defend this city. When the 3 knights finally dug up the bricks and stones piled at the door and walked out of the castle, they saw a scene like hell. Buildings blazing on both sides of the street. Civilians were running around like headless flies. There were also big holes on the streets and broken houses, all of which showed what kind of attack they had just suffered. The 3 looked back at the castle, but saw that the top layer of the tower in the corner of the castle had been lost, and there were several big holes in the wall next to it. The wide platform facing the small square was gone, leaving only a pile of debris at the door. The 3 looked at each other again, and they were sweating and scared again. Fortunately, the castle was still solid, and fortunately the enemy only attacked for a while. Then the 3 went to check the wall again, and found that there was no other damage except for the soldiers, who were trembling with fear. This made the three people feel fortunate again, but looking at the tents connected together outside the city, the three people were distressed again. What should they do tomorrow? Finally, the three had to return to the castle and report what they saw and heard to Lord Kevin, who was sitting on the throne again. After listening, Kevin had a gloomy face. Now he calmed down, thinking back to the unbearable scene just now. He was very angry, but he didn't know who to vent his anger on, so he could only hold it in. Kevin asked, "When will the reinforcement arrive?" The second knight immediately replied, "My lord, the reinforcement will take at least 1 day." "What, another day? When they come, they can only collect my body." Kevin said this, and remembered something, and said happily, "That's right. They dare not kill me, haha." What Kevin just remembered was that there was still a continental convention protecting him, so he was very happy, because now he has the capital to stubbornly resist to the end. Chapter 131, the day the city was captured. Just like these powerful people didn't care about the lives of ordinary people, Kevin didn't care about the lives of these powerful people. Of course, he didn't take the lives of the untouchables seriously. As long as he could drive away the enemy, he was going to use the lives of his own people. So Kevin ordered, "You must defend the city, and must hold on until the arrival of reinforcement." The three knights had no choice. Their lords were so tough, so they could only bite the bullet. The next day, after eating a hot breakfast, the soldiers of the infantry brigade came back to the outside of the city under the military order, and lined up to prepare for the siege. Lu Su said to Deking, "General, the enemy didn't abandon the city and flee. It seems that this small town still needs to be attacked." The rounds of artillery fire they launched last night were not just to send a greeting gift or something, but to make the people of this small town know what's good for them, and quickly abandon the city and flee, so as not to lose their lives in vain. Unexpectedly, the lord of this small town actually persisted. Is this because he believes that the army of Zar State dare not occupy it? Deking sneered and said, "Since you think this wall can protect you, then I will destroy this wall." He turned and ordered all artillery in the army, "Prepare solid bullets. Target the city wall." Yes, the messenger was as fast and efficient as ever. Against this kind of stone wall, solid bullets are far more effective than shrapnel bullets. Shrapnel bullets kill the enemy in the form of explosions, while solid bullets rely on kinetic energy impact. Moreover, the weight of solid bullets is greater than that of shrapnel bullets, so the kinetic energy that solid bullets can carry is also greater. The infantry brigade built an artillery position more than 800 meters away from the city wall. At this distance, whether it is siege artillery or field artillery, they can pour shells onto the opposite wall. On the other hand, although the enemy was in a high position, those bows and arrows could not attack such a far place. Not to mention 800 meters. Even the infantry and cavalry arrayed more than 500 meters outside the city wall could not be attacked by the soldiers on the city wall. After the battle the day before yesterday, Deking, Lu Su and others knew the enemy's weapons and attack methods. The forces in this place, most of their soldiers are mainly close combat, and the weapons they hold are also strange. There are axe-like chopping weapons. There are also general barrel stabbing weapons such as spears, and even weapons that throw stones. Long-range attack weapons are mainly bows and arrows, but it seems that they are all homemade hunting bows made by civilians for hunting. Special war bows are not found. For example, crossbows that require certain mechanical knowledge are even less. Perhaps because these territories are very remote, the intelligence sent back from Chang San Sheng's caravan shows that the three more powerful territories in the north already have professional soldiers. Fire. A total of 117 artillery bombarded the walls of the small town, round after round, continuously. Boom. This is not the sound of artillery, but the sound of the long-range city wall collapsing. The soldiers on the city wall have long been buried deep underground. Maybe they can still resist the first few rounds, but after a few more rounds, the city wall can only collapse, and the subsequent attacks are completely attacking the city. When the artillery gets too hot to cool down immediately, it has already attacked for more than 10 rounds. Looking at the walls of the small town, there is only a pile of ruins left, piled up on the original site. Even the houses in the city, a large area has no trace, only ruins are left, and only in the distance can you see the leaning houses. The siege artillery fired 10 rounds, the field artillery fired 15 rounds, and a total of 1,575 shells were poured into the small town. Such an attack force, once again appeared in front of the people of this world. After seeing that both walls had collapsed, King drew his sword and issued an order to attack the city. The artillery should cool down quickly, the cavalry should block the city gates, and the infantry should start the attack. The cavalry was divided into 2 teams, each to block the other 2 gates that were not attacked, and kill one enemy who came out, and never let an enemy escape. The infantry marched in neat steps again, climbed over the ruined city wall, and entered the small city. As long as they saw someone still running, they would never let him go. Lusu suggested at this time, "General, street fighting will cause a lot of casualties. Should we wait until the artillery cools down before attacking?" King looked at the soldiers entering the city, shook his head, and explained, "No, look at the city. Are there still people resisting now?" Lusu was just worried about the heavy casualties of the army just now. Now looking at the soldiers entering the city, as if entering an uninhabited place, there is no resistance at all, so he will not say anything more. This is because the 2 people stand at different angles, so the 2 people think differently when they look at the problem at the first time. King is the commander of an army, thinking about how to win. Lusu is a staff officer, thinking about tactics and how to reduce casualties. But they have the same idea, that is, they must complete the orders issued by the monarch. Yang Song gave them 3 goals for this expedition. The first is to open up the road so that the caravan can return, which is also the main purpose of this expedition. The second is to plunder food, which is also a task that must be completed. Xiago sent out caravans because of food shortages, and this goal is complete profit. The third is to punish the enemy, to let these forces that are hostile to Xiago know that it is the stupidest thing to be my enemy. The first 2 are goals that must be completed, and the last task can be completed by the way. Just like now, as long as Kevin is still alive, he will never dare to be an enemy of Xiago again. Seeing the one-sided killing in the city, Lusu frowned and suggested again, "General, ordinary civilians don't have to be killed. In addition to the counter effect, it will also delay time." Lusu is not kind-hearted. He thought so. Killing too many civilians is a stain for Xiago. King thought about it and agreed with Lusu's suggestion and ordered the army to stop attacking civilians and occupy this small town as soon as possible. Although they will give up this small town in the end, they will occupy it now not for other reasons, but to complete Yang Song's second task, plundering food. In fact, the only remaining strength of this small town has been destroyed in the artillery bombardment just now. Even those civilians who were forcibly conscripted had long been gone. Except, report to the general. The castle in the middle of the town refuses to surrender. Please instruct. A messenger who came on a flying horse reported the situation of the castle in the middle of the city. Because King ordered not to attack this castle by force and try to persuade it to surrender. But now it seems that Kevin is relying on the solidity of the castle and the identity of the Lord, and he refuses to compromise. Oh, really? Haha. King knew what the other party was thinking. As soon as he heard it, sneered twice, and ordered, "Blast the castle." Chapter 132, Plundered. Directly attacking with artillery would put the Lord in the castle in danger, but explosions are different. As long as one or several gaps are blown out, the rest will be no suspense. After hearing the order, the artillery, with a wooden barrel, approached the dilapidated castle under the protection of the infantry. Under one wall, a bag of gunpowder was roughly piled. Regardless of the consequences, the fuse was lit, and the surrounding soldiers were asked to retreat. Anyway, the people inside would definitely hide far away and not be afraid of being blown to death. With a boom, a big hole appeared on one wall of the castle, and the infantry immediately rushed in with shields raised. After a while of ping pong, mixed with a few screams, there was silence. "Let me go. I'm the Lord. You can't do this to me." Oh. A gray-haired old man wearing a dyed cloth was tied up by the soldiers and shouted incomprehensible words until the soldiers stuffed a ball of unknown things into his mouth, and the man calmed down. Soon, a group of people of all ages, both men and women, were tied up and brought out from behind. The soldiers followed the order and captured all the people in the castle alive, except those who resisted. General, these people were brought out from the castle in the city. A team leader pointed at the people tied up behind him and reported to Deking. Deking looked at the clothes of these people, nodded, and ordered, "Very good. Let the intelligence officers come over." General. The intelligence officers came over quickly. They were waiting behind. Deking hummed, pointed at the tied people with a horsewhip, and said, "Ask, who are these people?" "Yes, General." After the intelligence officer clasped his fists and saluted, he turned to the front of the group of people, saw Kevin with his mouth blocked, and stepped forward to take the thing out of Kevin's mouth. "I'm the Lord. You can't do this to me, you." Before the intelligence officer asked, Kevin revealed all his identities. The intelligence officer faced Deking again, clasped his fists and said, "This man said he is the Lord." Deking said with a no, and said happily, "Then ask him where his food is placed, and also, ask him what he is thinking, why he would provoke an enemy who knows nothing." The intelligence officer turned around and translated Deking's words. Kevin snorted with a sullen face, turned his head away, and stopped making noise. This time, without translation, Deking also knew the man's attitude. He said ha, laughed, and said to the intelligence officer, "These people are handed over to you. As long as you don't kill them, you can do whatever you want with the rest. Remember, this general only wants food now. Since this so-called lord is so principled, he will respect the other party's qualities and let the other party enjoy his admiration." Deking looked at the captives being taken away, and was no longer interested. Instead, he ordered, "Drive all the people in the city out of the city." He didn't want these civilians to fight with the soldiers for a bite or two of food. Moreover, looting is not a glorious thing. If no one sees it, the soldiers will not have such great psychological pressure. The soldiers followed the order, and the cavalry on the other two sides also opened the city gates and stopped these people from entering the city. The people who were driven out didn't care so much. Now they were too happy to be driven out of the city, so why would they go back? They were really scared by the sound and power of the artillery and the ferocity of the Tsar soldiers. The soldiers would not wait for them to pack up their belongings before driving them away. So when these people were driven out of the city, they didn't carry much items at all, and the rest were all in the city. Well, it's almost done. Deking looked at the sky. It was afternoon, and it was almost dark. He ordered, "Start harvesting." After the order was issued, the soldiers and the militia behind them all rushed into the small town and began to search. Empty carriages were also driven into the town, and soon, fully loaded carriages came out. Lusu stopped a carriage, looked inside and saw that it was full of food, and asked the groom, "Where did all this food come from?" The groom replied, "All of this was transported from the castle in the middle of the city." Lusu waved his hand and let the carriage continue to drive. He thought, "This is the food of the Lord, and it has all been confiscated." After a while, it was completely dark, and Deking ordered the troops to retreat. The sound of a gong rang from the back. The so-called advance, when you hear the drum, and retreat when you sound the gong. This gong refers to the gong. In the main tent at night, Lusu handed the military report of today's statistics to Deking, saying, "General, today's harvest is quite rich, but the consumption of ammunition is huge." Deking took the military report and saw that it was true. The military report showed that no soldiers were killed in today's battle, and only a dozen were slightly injured. It seemed that all the enemies were gathered on the east and south walls, ready to resist their attack, but unfortunately they were all buried in the end. The second thing was the harvest of grain. In addition to the dozen or so carriages that were searched out of the castle, there were more or less a few carriages in other mansions. Adding them all up, there were a total of 32 carriages, which means 64 tons of grain. Even so, they still didn't search those grain shops and houses. Because it was already very late today, Deking ordered people to search these places, where there were obviously grains first. It wouldn't be too late to look for other scattered places after tomorrow morning. Deking frowned when he looked at the last item about ammunition consumption, and said, "So much ammunition was consumed today." Lusu spread his hands helplessly and replied, "I also hope that I'm wrong, but this is the fact." Deking frowned even more tightly and said, "But this is too much. This is half of the army's inventory. In fact, there is not much ammunition left." Lu Su added, "General, don't forget the consumption of the battle 2 days ago." Looking at the king's sad face, Lu Su explained, "One firing of a siege cannon will consume 10 kilograms of gunpowder. Although the consumption of a field artillery is smaller, it is not much smaller. General, you calculate, how many shots have we fired?" The king calculated secretly and was very surprised. He sighed and said, "More than 30,000 kilograms of gunpowder are gone. Yes. We only have more than 10,000 kilograms of gunpowder left. The remaining shells and gunpowder are not enough for a battle." Lu Su also sighed. "I didn't feel anything when I fired the cannons, but now I think back, these cannons are incredibly powerful, but their consumption is even more amazing." Lu Su thought for a moment and said, "General, we can only report the truth to the emperor. I hope there is enough ammunition in the country to withstand our consumption." The king put down the military report in his hand and agreed helplessly, "It can only be like this." Chapter 133 Enemy Reinforcement. Yang Song was also surprised when he received the letter from the front line requesting ammunition supply. He didn't expect that 50,000 kilograms of gunpowder would only be enough for 2 or 3 battles. He couldn't help but sigh. When the cannon sounds, it's worth a lot of gold. The ancients were honest. But it doesn't matter. Now the development of Long Island has entered a stable stage. In addition to being used as fertilizer, the mine ore is also used to make a lot of gunpowder. Now there are about 100,000 kilograms of gunpowder stored. Even if it's not enough, we can speed up the production. But the replenishment of artillery shells is a bit troublesome. Solid bullets are easy to say, just an iron ball, but shrapnel shells require some technology. It's not that the arsenal can't make shrapnel shells, but the speed is very touching, and they can't make many in a day. Yang Song looked at the battle report sent back from the front again, called Lizzie, and asked, "Lizzie, how many artillery shells are in stock in the arsenal?" Lizzie replied, reporting to the Lord, "There are more than 3,000 large and small artillery shells in stock, more than 2,000 solid shells, and more than 1,000 shrapnel shells." After hearing Lizzie's answer, Yang Song felt that the number was still a bit small, and asked, "Can a batch of gunpowder and artillery shells be made in a hurry?" Lizzie calculated in his mind, and replied with a bow, reporting to the Lord, "Yes, stop the manufacture of some other weapons, and use all the production lines in the arsenal that can produce artillery shells to produce artillery shells. 200 solid shells and nearly 100 shrapnel shells can be produced a day. Okay, let's do it this way. Let the people in the rear security bureau send all the artillery shells and gunpowder in stock to the soldiers in the front." Yang Song is now taking out all his family assets, but it is only enough for the consumption of 3 or 4 battles of the infantry brigade. After all, the infantry brigade has only been in this world for more than half a year. It is not easy to produce more than 3,000 artillery shells in such a short time. The Navy's warships have a lot of artillery shells in stock, but the 100mm caliber shells of the frigates are not compatible with the infantry brigade's artillery and cannot be used at all. The 90mm caliber of the infantry brigade's field artillery and the 120mm caliber of the siege artillery, none of them can be used. Therefore, they can only be manufactured separately. Yang Song can only hope that these ammunition can last for a few more days, otherwise, he can only return them and make plans. As for the matter of using human lives to pile up, Yang Song never thought about it. The small town in Kevin's territory finally looted more than 40 carts of food. Other items, except for metals such as gold, silver, copper, and iron, the remaining rags Ziyuo simply didn't look at. Even these metals, if they are transported back to the country, they have to be melted again. This resource is not small. There are more than 10 carts. Mosquito meat is also meat. The current Ziyuo is not qualified to be picky. More than 50 carts of supplies were transported back to the country, and were transported to different locations according to their types. Food was transported to warehouses, metals were transported to industrial towns, and gold and silver were transported to the finance bureau. In addition to the black beans, which were the most abundant, there were actually 1 or 2 carts of rice in the looted food. This was the food that could be used to recruit the people. This made Yang Song very happy. It was the first time he had seen something like this in this world. However, judging from the varieties, they were all very primitive, with a maximum of more than 300 kilograms per acre, and could only be used for food. It was said that this rice was searched out from the center of the castle, and there was only this much of it. Could it be that rice was still a luxury in this world? General, the scout reports. The personal soldier clasped his fists and reported to Deking, the enemy's reinforcement have arrived. Huh? There are reinforcement? Deking exclaimed, called the scout over, and asked, how many people, in which direction? Where are they? The scout clasped his fists and said, General, there are more than 7,000 enemies coming from the north, and they are 30 kilometers away from the small town. After receiving this information, Deking frowned, waved his hand to let the scout go, and said to Lu Su, what will the fall of this small town make these enemy reinforcement do? Lu Su stroked his beard on his chin, and nodded in agreement. The civilians driven out of the city by our army should encounter these enemy troops. The fall of this small town cannot be concealed. The enemy now has only two choices. One is to turn around and return to defend immediately, and the other is to continue moving forward and try to see if they can retake the city. Lu Su analyzed the enemy's movements and continued, the enemy knows that our army has artillery, but they still dare to come to help. This means that the enemy either has the confidence to defeat our army or has to come to help. Deking continued to ask, then what is the reason for the enemy? Looking at the situation of the four territories, they formed an alliance to resist our army. This is because the strength of a single territory is insufficient. Lu Su did not answer directly, but continued to analyze, and finally answered, so the enemy must have to come to help. Because one of the four territories was attacked, the other three territories, as allies, must come to help. Otherwise, if the other territories are attacked in the future, there will be no reinforcement, and this alliance will be equivalent to nothing. Deking ordered, rest here for a day tonight, and tomorrow morning, the whole army will meet the enemy in the North City. The next day, the infantry brigade lined up in the open space outside the North City to meet the enemy. The difference is that today's battle formation is a little different. The infantry battle formation is behind the artillery position. All the artillery of the brigade is lined up in two rows facing the direction where the enemy is coming. Two rows of artillery were arranged in a staggered manner, with each gun position 5 meters apart, and the battle line was 350 meters wide. A 50-meter passage was reserved in the middle to facilitate the heavy cavalry to charge. The infantry was 10 meters behind the artillery position, waiting for an order to rush to the front of the artillery. The cavalry was still the same, guarding the two wings of the entire army. The entire army watched several scouts appear from out of sight. They rode their war horses and came close. Report. The scout ran straight to Deking under the general's flag. The scout came to the general's flag and was stopped by Deking's personal guards. Under the supervision of the personal guards, he reported to Deking, General, the enemy is still 5 kilometers away from here. Deking nodded, and after letting the scouts retreat to rest, he continued to look at the front of the battlefield and continued to wait for the arrival of the enemy. Report. The scouts continued to report, the enemy is 3 kilometers away from us. Deking still did not move. Not long after, a black line appeared in front of the battlefield. This black line gradually became clear. This is the incoming enemy. Seeing the enemy approaching, 2 kilometers, Deking did not let the siege artillery fire. 1.5 kilometers. Deking drew out his sword and ordered, beat the drum. Boom boom boom. The sound of the war drum sounded immediately, and the enemy also stopped and began to organize the queue and prepare to charge. All artillery solid bullets are ready. Target 800 meters ahead. Ready to shoot flat. Chapter 134. Plowing the enemy. Flat shooting does not mean shooting horizontally. At a distance of 800 meters, only siege artillery can really attack horizontally. The enemy army on the opposite side was once again in a commotion because of the sound of the war drums. Seeing that there were few people in the infantry brigade, they launched a charge as usual. It would take only a few minutes to rush over at a distance of 1,500 meters. Moreover, this time the enemy army did not use the highest speed at the beginning, but first trotted slowly for a while, and then slowly accelerated to reach the speed of charging. Lu Su looked at the enemy's actions, laughed, and said nothing more. Now is the time for Deking to concentrate on commanding. He is not stupid enough to disturb now. 1000 meters, 900 meters, 800 meters. Deking still did not order the artillery to fire. He only saw him staring at the front with a calm face. But his right hand holding the sword tightly, and his left hand holding the reins tightly showed that his heart was far from being as calm as it seemed. The enemy rushed over 700 meters. He said to himself, now is the time. He swung his sword vigorously and shouted angrily, fire. The sudden roar startled the horse he was sitting on. As the flags around him waved, the artillery officers who had been waiting for orders for a long time also waved their flags. Fire! Fire! The artillery commander's flag fell, and the artillery soldiers pulled the ropes in their hands at the same time. The rope drove the flintlock, and the hammer of the flintlock hit the iron sheet below fiercely under the strong action of the rigid spring. The collision between the two produced a large number of sparks, which ignited the gunpowder in the chamber, and the gunpowder burned along the small hole on the wall of the gun into the barrel. Instantly, the chestnut black gunpowder weighing several kilograms in the barrel was instantly ignited. The violent combustion of gunpowder produced a large amount of high-temperature gas, which could only explode towards the slightly loose side under the restraint of the gun barrel. Boom. The solid iron ball was pushed out of the barrel by the high-temperature gas of the gunpowder, and under the guidance of the long barrel, it shot out into the distance. The high-temperature gas of the gunpowder and the heat generated by the friction with the air during the super high-speed flight were all concentrated in this cannonball. This cannonball made of a solid iron ball is now red hot. After a short flight, the red cannonball met the chest of an enemy on the opposite side. The moment the cannonball touched the chest of this enemy, it did not feel any resistance, and broke through the obstacles directly, and then met the head of the second enemy. Then, this cannonball broke through an arm, a shoulder, a neck, and another chest. This cannonball finally passed through the entire enemy array, and flew to an unknown distance, and what greeted it was an unknown tomorrow. Boom. All the artillery was fired at the same time, and more than 100 artillery pieces only rang out one cannon. The sound of the cannon made the nearby soldiers' scalps numb and their ears tinnitus. Even the battle-hardened war horses in the distance were frightened by the sound. The sound of the cannon was accompanied by the miserable state of the enemy. More than 100 bloody passages instantly appeared in the enemy army. These were 117 passages paved with the blood and flesh of the enemy. From the infantry battalion side, the scenery at that moment was so spectacular that people couldn't help but want to see it again. The artillery proved with their actual actions that this idea was very practical. In less than 20 seconds, the reloaded artillery fired one after another. However, this time there was no volley just now, no violent artillery roars, and no such spectacular scene as just now. There were only the enemy's wailing, and more bloody passages. At this distance, the enemy had no chance to turn around and escape. They could only rush forward at the risk of their lives, and only after rushing close to and passing the artillery would there be a glimmer of hope. But all the soldiers of the infantry brigade will tell the enemy how extravagant this idea is. 700 meters to 300 meters, this short 400 meters. Even if the artillery fires at a rate of 1 round of artillery fire every 20 seconds, even if the enemies are all flying men, it is enough to fire 2 rounds. Not to mention, in fact, the enemy took almost a minute to cover the 400 meters, but after the artillery fired 2 more rounds, accompanied by the strong crossbow arrows flying overhead, it loaded the last shell, shotgun, grapeshot. Boom, a relatively dull sound of artillery sounded, and a large area of the enemy who was still charging desperately in front was instantly swept away. On the faces nearby, the faces that were full of hope and gratitude the moment before disappeared instantly under the attack of the shotgun. The enemy who rushed in front was blown into pieces, leaving only some bone residue, bringing a cloud of blood mist, which spread and dyed the large area of land behind red. After the artillery fired the last shot, it no longer reloaded, but drew out the short knife with it, ready for hand-to-hand combat. Unfortunately, the artillerymen's short swords did not play any role, because the infantrymen behind them had already stepped in neat steps, past them, and stood at the forefront of the battle formation. Are you kidding? If these artillerymen were to fight hand-to-hand, wouldn't this be a slap in the face of these professional hand-to-hand fighters? The crossbow arrows in the sky never stopped. Under multiple shots, endless arrows fell into the enemy formation. 100 meters. The attack power of the crossbows burst out instantly. Shua shua shua. Short crossbow arrows shook the air, and a black rain of arrows covered the enemy's head. This was not just one wave, but a continuous attack. From the side, it seemed as if there was a black arch bridge connecting the enemy and us. This black bridge was made up of endless crossbow arrows. In fact, after the enemy entered more than 100 meters, there were sporadic counterattacks, but the few arrows and stones without any power could not cause any harm to the soldiers at all. The enemy finally approached the army with shields and comrades' bodies, but in front of them, besides a shield wall, there were also some heavily armored soldiers who couldn't even see their eyes. This lucky enemy looked back inadvertently, only to find that there were no comrades behind him. Only then did he realize that these people were the last survivors on his side. Too fast. The battle came quickly and ended even faster. Less than 2 minutes. From the first shell fired to the end now. It took less than 2 minutes. The enemy was wiped out in an instant before they even reacted. These surviving enemies found that they were clearly charging and saw the enemy right in front of them, but they couldn't see their comrades behind and in front of them. Now, these people are no longer so lucky. Attack. Not only someone gave an order, swish. The last wave of arrows covered and sent away the last few enemies. I wish you all a happy National Day. Chapter 135. The war is decided. The last enemy held his weapon high, his body pierced with arrows, and fell backwards. The battlefield was silent. The east wind blew up the battle flag, which fluttered in the wind. The air was filled with the smell of burning gunpowder, mixed with a strong smell of blood. In front of the battle formation, there were corpses of enemies everywhere. The arrows standing on the corpses closer and on the ground were like weeds, growing unscrupulously. Farther away, countless broken limbs and arms were scattered everywhere. The deep red marks on the ground made the clear sunshine gloomy. The faces of the soldiers, stained by gunpowder smoke, were calm and there was a trace of fatigue, although the battle lasted only 2 minutes. The resolute faces could not eliminate the fatigue of the soul, and the solid body was also a soul with emotions. No matter how strong the willies, it is still a flesh and blood body. Today is the 6th day since the expedition from Cheyenne Pass. In just 6 days, there have been 3 battles, an average of 1 battle every day. After setting out from the Cheyenne Pass, the continuous battles gradually made the soldiers accustomed to this urgent rhythm. I can only hope that the next battle will end soon. Half an hour ago, the reinforcement were heading towards the small town where Kevin's castle was located. Dear Knights of the Cavalry, the enemy has lined up outside the city and is waiting for us. A spy returned to the marching army and found the knights of this army. Like the other army that was destroyed, this army also has 4 knights, and Kevin's second knight is one of these 4 knights. At this time, Kevin's other 2 knights were all buried in the small town. It is unknown whether they were buried under the city wall or destroyed in the castle. The second knight immediately asked, "The enemy is lined up outside the city? Have you seen the Lord?" The spy knew that the knight was asking about Lord Kevin and replied, "My lord, I didn't see it, but there was a lot of black smoke in the city, as if there was a fire somewhere in the city." When the second knight heard the spy's answer, he instantly collapsed on the wildebeest, looking at the south with lifeless eyes. He tried his best and finally followed the other 3 knights to other territories to request reinforcement. Now it seems that it is still a step too late. The other 3 knights looked at each other and were a little surprised. They didn't expect the city to fall so quickly, but they didn't worry too much. Anyway, the enemy would return the city in the end, but they didn't know how much they would pay at that time. Now they heard that there were still enemies waiting for their army, which made them a little angry. Was it looking down on their 7,000 troops? It was as if the enemy was saying to them, "Come and die." How could they not be angry? A knight who was a little older shouted to the second knight who was in a state of dismay, "Brother, wake up and cheer up. We are just ahead. Do you have anything to say?" The second knight was awakened by the knight who was a little older. After coming to his senses, he put away his sad state, cheered up, thought for a while and said, "The war is about to start, and the enemy is waiting for us. I have nothing to say, just one thing. He looked at the other 3 knights seriously and said solemnly, "The enemy has a very powerful weapon with a loud sound, like thunder. It is much more powerful than a trebuchet, but the attack speed is the same as that of a trebuchet, which is slower. But we have more people, so as long as we can rush over, we can win." The second knight once again emphasized the power of the enemy's weapon. But the other 3 didn't think so. It seemed that a weapon like a trebuchet was so scary, wasn't it just a little louder? Although the power of the trebuchet was great, it could only kill 2 or 3 people at most at a time. Just run faster. So the knight who was a little older replied, "Don't worry, brother, we will pay attention. Just like you said, we have more people, just run faster." "Okay." The second knight nodded, looked at the enemy waiting in front, and said, "Get ready, we will also start to line up, and prepare to attack." Then several people discussed the arrangement of the army they commanded, and then returned to the army they commanded. The 4 knights lined up, rode on the wildebeests, faced each other from a distance, nodded solemnly, and ordered at the same time, "All troops attack." Next, the 4 knights, including the second knight, saw once these so-called weapons that are more powerful than catapults are powerful, and the so-called experience is to use their own lives to witness the power of this weapon. In the first round of attacks, 3 of the 4 knights were bombarded to pieces, and the remaining relatively thin knight was also turned into blood and flesh in the second round of artillery bombardment. At this point, Kevin's 3 knights all returned to dust, soil to soil, blood stained the earth, and flesh and blood returned to nature. The battle is over. Lusu didn't know whether he was reporting to Deking or talking to himself. Deking nodded gently and said, "Yes, it's over. From this moment on, the war in the north has been decided. Zerguo has won. The enemy's living force has basically been completely eliminated, and the remaining ones are no longer a threat, including the city walls. Next, it is only necessary to simply break through the other 3 cities and then plunder them. This is a very simple thing." In the battle just now, Deking and Lusu bullied the enemy's lack of organized cavalry, otherwise, they would not dare to put the artillery at the forefront of the position. As long as the enemy has a cavalry of about 1,000, they can take the risk of assaulting. After the assault into the artillery position, these artillery will not be much of a threat. Of course, if the enemy has cavalry, Deking and Lusu will not formulate such tactics. This battle should be regarded as the second field battle of the infantry brigade. In the first battle, the 2 armies confronted each other across the passage, but the confrontation did not last long. The time was only 1 night and 1 morning. The tactics of this first battle were very conservative. It was precisely because it was the first battle that Deking and Lusu developed relatively conservative, but widely applicable tactics. The result was a certain number of casualties. Finally, after discussing and collecting enough enemy intelligence, they thought that such tactics were too conservative, and decided to let go and make full use of their own advantages. This is why the tactics of all artillery in the front were arranged in the second battle. Facts have proved that such tactics are very effective, even beyond expectations. They themselves did not expect that laying the artillery flat and shooting at close range would have such great power. The shells plowed a series of gullies in the enemy. In theory, artillery is a long-range strike weapon, and sometimes its deterrent power on the battlefield is much more obvious than its actual combat power. Now after this battle, this weapon, which was later called the God of War, has begun to show its prowess. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 136, Rear Decision. Yang Song watched the battle on the small map as usual. He was also very surprised that this primitive artillery could still be so powerful. At this time, he also knew how strong the combat effectiveness of this conventional infantry brigade was. Logically speaking, an army of 3,500 people is not worthy of the title of brigade. At most it is a reinforced regiment. But even an army with only such a small number of people was classified as a brigade in the system sequence. Now Yang Song knows thoroughly that these artillery are probably a very important plus point. Since they can occupy this establishment, there must be a reason for them. Although the number of people is small, the combat power is strong. This is exactly what Xiago needs now. If the number of people is insufficient, then use weapons and equipment to make up for it. But unfortunately, Xiago still can't afford it. The cost of a cannon is very expensive, not to mention that the artillery currently produced by the arsenal is just enough. There is no way. The task is long and arduous, and now is not the time to consider these things. Let's end this war first. Someone come. Yang Song shouted to the outside of the door, and when the guards pushed the door open, he ordered, "Go and call Yang Zhang, Chen Ping, Yang Li, Li Zi and others." "Yes, Your Majesty." The guards clasped their fists and accepted the order, closing the study door as they left. Yang Song went downstairs and came to the reception room. He asked Xiaolan to make a few cups of tea and then sat in the main seat with a book and started reading. "Greetings, Your Majesty." After a while, several people arrived one after another. Yang Song asked them to sit down. After everyone arrived, he put down the book in his hand and said, "The war outside the pass has already taken shape." He looked around, seeing the inquiring eyes of several people, and said happily, "Deking, Lu Su and others have won. Xiago has won. Congratulations, Your Majesty." After hearing what Yang Song said, Yang Zhang stood up and saluted first, saying, "Congratulations, Your Majesty. This is all thanks to Your Majesty's kindness." Yang Zhang can finally breathe a sigh of relief. He has been very busy during this period. The allocation of materials alone has exhausted all his efforts. For example, many things in civil affairs are managed by his subordinates, and he has no energy to manage them. As soon as Yang Zhang sat down, Chen Ping stood up. Although he didn't know where Yang Song got the news, he did not gain nothing. Chen Ping saluted to Yang Song and said, "Your Majesty, according to the information I have received, the 3 northern territories outside the pass are watching this war and have no intention of participating." "Very good. Haha, now I'm relieved." Yang Song was very happy. This information is crucial. After learning that the other 3 territories have no intention of intervening, he can continue to develop Xiago stably after this war. After saying that, he instructed Yang Li, publicize this news to the people in the country and make them happy. "Yes, my lord. I will make the people happy." Yang Li stood up with a rosy face and happily bowed to Yang Song and said, "I'm very happy too." "Hahaha, yes, I'm happy too." Yang Song pressed his hand and motioned them to sit down, then turned to Li Zi and asked, "How is the production of ammunition, arrows and other military equipment going?" Li Zi stood up and saluted, "My lord, everything goes well. According to the current situation, it is enough for the consumption of the soldiers at the front." "That's good." Yang Song nodded and said with satisfaction, "We must produce more of these consumables. If the raw materials are not enough, we will increase the mining volume. If there are not enough manpower, we will drive the Nanman miners to dig. Don't be afraid of tiring them to death. As long as this period of time passes, these Nanman will be cleared sooner or later." The following is Yang Zhang's instructions, because the other party is still in charge of managing these Nanman people, and is still acting as an Nanman king. "Yes, I obey your command." Yang Zhang stood up again and bowed to receive the order, then asked, "Your Majesty, when will the merchant caravan be back?" Yang Song looked at the map in front of him, estimated the time, and replied, "Be prepared. It won't be a few days." Yang Song knew what Yang Zhang meant by asking this question, because the caravan would also bring back some food, so Yang Zhang had to make preparations in advance. For example, storage, rationing, etc. "Yes, Your Majesty." After Yang Zhang sat down, he was thinking about how to prepare and where to use the food that was hard to get from selling goods. Finally, Yang Song said to everyone go down, Chen Ping stay. After the 3 left, Yang Song asked Chen Ping, "How are the selected boys and girls being trained?" "My lord, after more than half a month of training, these people are still unusable, and they need more training." After Chen Ping answered, he explained, "These southern barbarians were originally from indigenous tribes, so they are too dull and unbearable to be educated." Yang Song nodded in understanding, thought for a while and asked, "Now that the war outside the northern pass is about to end, can we change a group of people? In the past, There were no conditions, and no intention to go to war with the forces outside the pass, so only these primitive tribal people could be used. Now that the war in the north has started and won, the conditions are there. After hearing this, Chenping immediately agreed and said, "That's great." He had wanted to tell Yang Song about this for a long time, but the people he was training now were obtained by Zhiguo with great difficulty, and it also consumed so much materials and energy, so he couldn't just give up. But now with Yang Song's consent, it's different again, so he can let go and do it. Yang Song also thought of the original group of people. He thought for a long time, and didn't have a good way, so he frowned and asked, "How are you going to deal with those people?" Chenping replied confidently, "Reply to the Lord. Since these people are so unbearable to be educated, let them play their last remaining heat, and make contributions to those who come later." Then he told Yang Song how to play their remaining heat. That is to present the bloody scene in front of these people, who come later through a harsh elimination system, make a demonstration in advance, or use it as a target, props. After listening to Yang Song, he still couldn't accept such a thing calmly in his heart, but he nodded and agreed to Chenping's way of dealing with it on the surface. In addition to hundreds of boys and girls, other young children were also dealt with in the same way. Anyway, it was a simple matter to find some young children on the battlefield. It's just that the consumption has increased a bit, but fortunately, with this war, they have enough local food to provide consumption. Anyway, these local grains can't be used for conscription, and the people are not used to eating. Since the food looted from the north cannot be used for conscription, it is basically all provided to the southern barbarians, saving a lot of food for development. This food is enough for them to consume for a long time, and there are 3 territories to plunder. This is equivalent to launching a war, eliminating hostile forces, taking back the caravan, and providing food for the southern barbarian miners. That is, a free additional source of mineral output. It is not common to achieve multiple goals at one stroke. Chapter 137, Begging for Surrender. Outside the northern pass, the day after the Battle of Bicheng ended, after the army cleaned up the battlefield, there were several more piles of ashes on the land. In the future, this land soaked in blood and flesh will grow more lush vegetation, and they will continue to follow the cycle of heaven and earth, using this luxurious nutrition to reproduce to their heart's content. General, yesterday's battle consumed a lot. Lu Su brought up the topic again. Last night he reported to Deking about the consumption of artillery ammunition. Deking hummed and continued on his way. Now they are on their way to the small territory in the east. Only 5 rounds of artillery were fired yesterday, only half of 1,000, and the consumption was less than half of 1,000, and there were also many supplements sent from the rear. Lu Su touched his beard and continued, "In this way, we have no worries, and can go forward bravely." Deking heard this, and nodded in agreement, and then said, "That's right. But siege warfare still consumes a lot of ammunition." Deking also knew that yesterday's battle was a great victory, and even the casualties were negligible. The utilization rate of artillery was maximized, and the consumption of ammunition was reduced by half. But siege warfare is not like field warfare. The enemy's wall is there, and it is impossible to let the enemy's wall collapse without artillery. Now Deking is having a headache about this. How can we use as little ammunition as possible to destroy the enemy's wall? Lu Su was also very troubled by this problem. If he was close, he would be attacked, increasing unnecessary casualties. If he was far away, he would consume ammunition. They had to reserve some of their ammunition in case of accidents. It would be great if there was a tunnel under the enemy's wall. This is the common voice of the two. Because as long as gunpowder is placed under the city wall, a spark can cause the entire city wall to collapse. Unfortunately, they didn't have that. Although they could dig tunnels themselves, it would be more effective to spend some ammunition if they had that time. We can only attack by force. Lu Su sighed. Even with his wisdom, he couldn't think of any effective way for a while. Deking also sighed and said, "As long as there is a harvest, the consumption of ammunition is necessary. There is nothing to worry about. As the commander-in-chief of an army, he must be much more decisive. As long as victory can be achieved, a little consumption is still necessary." Lu Su said helplessly, "This is the only way for now. Let's see if there is a good way then." Lusu was not worried about the consumption of this little ammunition, but was being hard on himself. He was a little unwilling to accept that he was a staff officer of an army, but he didn't have a good way to solve the problem. After more than a day of marching, they arrived outside the city of this territory at noon the next day, and found that this city was actually built along the river, just like Cheyenne Key City. A wide river flows from the northwest to the southeast outside the North City. Seeing this terrain, Lusu said, "It would be great if Commander Li Bao's naval fleet was here." Deking glanced at Lusu and asked, "Even if it is here, it's just adding a few artillery. What's the use?" "Haha, General, you don't know that there is no wall on the riverside of this city, but there is a port. If the fleet is here, our army can land on the beach and launch an attack directly from the city." Lusu proudly touched his beard and explained the tactics to Deking. Deking thought that it was not wrong to think from the perspective of saving ammunition alone. This can save a lot of ammunition, but the casualties of the soldiers are estimated to be a bit large. This tactic is just a casual chat between the two of them. In fact, it should be done as it should be. Give orders after a short rest at noon. Prepare to attack the city in the afternoon. Deking ordered the soldiers around him. "Yes, General." Without saying a word, the soldiers turned around and passed the order. The infantry brigade was making a fire and cooking outside the city and starting to rest, but the dignitaries in the city were not in such a good mood. "My lord, surrender. We can't win. An army of 13,000 people lost." A noble of this territory was persuading the lord of this territory, saying, "Did you see the result of Lord Kevin? He was detained, and his 3 knights were all dead." The lord said with a bitter face, "I know, but will we be okay if we surrender?" "It will be okay, as long as we meet the other party's demands. They will let us go." The noble assured solemnly. "Anyway, it was Lord Kevin who provoked the enemy. He is the culprit. We just have to send troops, because of the alliance." "Okay, you go outside the city immediately and talk to them. Ask them what it takes to let us go." The lord finally agreed to surrender reluctantly. One of his knights died on the battlefield, and another was standing in front of him, nodding in agreement to surrender. Moreover, he did not have more than 3,000 troops. Now the city had no soldiers to defend. Even if there were soldiers, it would be useless in front of the enemy's terrible weapon that could summon thunder. The noble said with a sacrificial look, "I will go now." After that, he turned around and walked out of the city, leaving a bleak back to his lord and others, as if he would never come back. Outside the city, Deking and Lusu looked at each other in surprise after learning that people were sent from the city to discuss surrender. They thought that people in this world were all stubborn. They thought that these forces would only rely on their status as lords and the confidence that their territories would not be occupied, and they would all resist to the end. Unexpectedly, he met such a sensible person so soon. Deking laughed and said, "Please come in quickly." Soon the envoy who came to discuss surrender was invited into the military tent. Deking and Lusu were still very polite to such a person who knew the current situation. "I have already known the purpose of the messenger's visit. I wonder when you will open the city and surrender?" This was translated by the intelligence personnel and conveyed to the other party. The noble bowed his head with a flattering look and said, "General/Knight, I'm here on behalf of the Lord to discuss the surrender." "Oh, there are conditions? Tell me," Deking asked curiously. "In this case, what other conditions can the other party talk about?" The noble continued to bow his head and said, "The Lord said that, as long as you don't harm the nobles who have his territory, and don't plunder his territory, you can directly ask for other requirements." The noble added a condition without authorization, which is the condition that the nobles cannot be harmed. After hearing this, Deking smiled at Lusu, and Lusu nodded at him with a smile. Deking continued, "No problem, but this general leads a large army here, and there are also many consumptions, so your territory will take out 50 carts of food, and this general will lead the troops to retreat immediately." Then the intelligence personnel translated for the noble, "How much food is in a cart?" The noble was dumbfounded when he heard the request. 100,000 catties of grain was not a small number. He was a little afraid to agree to such a large amount of grain, but he was more afraid of the other party's attack. He had to ask carefully, "General, I can't make a decision on such a large amount of grain." I will report to you after I go back and discuss with the Lord. D. King waved his hand indifferently and agreed to the other party's small request, but in order to prevent the other party from delaying time, he gave a deadline and said, before dark today, the general must know the answer. Chapter 138, Plundering Three Lands. Yes, yes, yes. I will go back and discuss with the Lord, and I will persuade the Lord to give out the food. After saying that, the noble bowed and left the military tent, quickly rode on the wildebeest, and rushed back to the city. After the noble returned to the castle and met the Lord, he quickly stated the demands of the enemies outside the city. What? 100,000 cates of food? Where can I find so much food? The Lord stood up from his seat in shock and asked, can't it be less? The noble replied helplessly, Lord, the other party said that, if we don't take out so much food, they will come in and take it in person. He emphasized the word come in and take it in person, fearing that the Lord would be stubborn and resist to the end. At that time, the Lord would still be the Lord, but their people would most likely die. After hearing this, the Lord slumped down on his seat and said weakly, but I really don't have so much food. I can only take out 30,000 kilograms of food at most. After hearing the Lord's confession, the noble rolled his eyes and said, I can provide 3,000 kilograms of food. Although the Lord was surprised by the other party's generosity, he still waved his hand weakly and said, what's the use of your 3,000 kilograms? It's far from enough. It's still far from enough. It's impossible for the Lord to provide all this food alone. Therefore, I suggest that all the nobles, big and small forces, and civilians in the territory must provide food. When the Lord heard the noble's suggestion, his eyes suddenly lit up and said, this is a good idea. Let's do it this way. You can do it. We must get all the food today. After hearing this suggestion, the Lord thought that he could get so much food together, and in the end he might not have to take out much food himself. Even if the food in the whole city is not enough, he can make up the rest soon, right? As for how other people in the city would survive without food, he was too lazy to care. It would be fine in normal times, but now it was an extraordinary period, and he could only take care of himself. As the Lord's order was issued, a wailing sound suddenly rang out in the city. Regardless of the civilians pleading, the few soldiers forcibly plundered their food. Some soldiers eventually developed to the point of looting and committing all kinds of evil, which made the civilians miserable. But how much food can ordinary civilians plunder? The nobles had to set their sights on various forces that were a little higher. Under the Lord's mandatory order, all the nobles and knights in the city paid more than 3,000 kilograms of food. In the end, they actually got nearly 80,000 kilograms of food. He only needed to add more than 20,000 kilograms. In this way, the Lord would save nearly 10,000 kilograms of food, which made him very happy, and he greatly praised this noble. But ordinary civilians and other dignitaries hated this noble to the bone, and they wished they could eat his flesh and sleep on his skin. The noble finally arrived at the camp before dark, and reported to the king, General, the food has been prepared, but there are not so many transportation tools in the city, and it cannot be transported out of the city. I hope that the general will send people to transport it. D. King was very surprised. He didn't expect that the other party really gathered so much food. He was very satisfied and said, it doesn't matter. Open the city gate and let my army enter the city. We will carry it ourselves. D. King looked at the other party's embarrassed look and said, don't worry, I promise that, after entering the city, I will only carry food, and there will be no problem with other things. And if you don't agree, don't blame me for being rude. At the end of the speech, D. King pretended to be majestic and shouted loudly. The noble was frightened by D. King's words and nodded quickly, fearing that he would be dragged out and chopped if he answered too much. He said, okay, I will go back and ask them to open the city gate. The result was very smooth, and there was no moth in this territory. After the soldiers of the infantry brigade took over the city gates and walls, it was too late for the other party to regret it. D. King also abided by the agreement. After taking 100,000 cates and 50 carriages of food, he withdrew his troops from the small town and the territory. He will continue to lead the army to the second territory, which is also a very critical place. It is related to whether the caravan can return to the country smoothly. Therefore, after D. King led the soldiers of the infantry brigade to arrive outside the city. They rested for a night, and regardless of whether the other party had the intention to surrender, they directly ordered the artillery to open fire. This was the morning of the 10th day after the expedition. Amid the rumbling of artillery, the walls of the small town in this territory were completely destroyed. The entire city was burned to ashes, and all the food that should be robbed was looted. As for the lord of this territory, he has gone to accompany Kevin. The next step is to send fast horses to the north to inform Zhao Wu, Deking and others, and say to them, "You have worked hard, and now you can go home." The opening of the passage has shocked the surrounding territories, including the 3 larger territories in the north. When Deking led his army to the last territory, the middle-aged lord named Lance had already prepared 100,000 kilograms of grain and transported it outside the city, waiting for Deking and his men to arrive. Lord Lance heard that the lord in the north, his neighbor, was arrested because he was reluctant to give up 100,000 kilograms of grain. He hesitated for a moment and was captured. Even the city was burned to ashes, and the lord's castle was bombed to pieces by that powerful weapon. He didn't dare to gamble again, to see how patient the other party was. His extra preparation was a complete unexpected gain for Deking and Lu Su, so they didn't explain much. Anyway, it was a benefit they got, so they just made a fortune in silence. It seems that letting go of the Eastern Territory is still very effective. At least the enemy will not have a strong will to resist, which is also convenient for Deking and his men, so that they can spend less effort. Finally, after transporting the last 100,000 kilograms of food, Deking went to the north to prepare to meet Zhao Wu, Chang Sun Sheng and their caravan. According to the returning messenger, the caravan's harvest was not small. In addition to the 50 carts of food, it also harvested a large number of gold coins and copper coins. Even so, only 10 carts of less precious goods were sold. If the other 10 carts of more precious goods could be sold, the harvest would be even more amazing. But for the sake of stability, Chang Sun Sheng and his men dared not take out these precious goods. They were sure that after these goods were taken out, the hostile forces this time would not only be 4 small territories, but all the territories in this basin. Therefore, these precious goods were hidden tightly and did not dare to be exposed at all. Even so, there were still many local forces that were eyeing the wealth of the caravan. But Zhao Wu and Chang Sun Sheng were not soft persimmons, and they could be easily controlled by anyone. With the cooperation of 1 literary and 1 martial, the caravan successfully passed this period of time. In addition, Chang Sun Sheng used his wisdom to lay many secret hands in this city and harvested a lot of other things. If all this is explained, it would be another story. Chapter 139, Taking Back the Caravan. To the north of the destroyed city in the north, the infantry brigade led by Deking and Lu Su received the caravan heading south. General D, Staff Officer Lu, haha, long time no see. After meeting Deking and Lu Su, Chang Sun Sheng laughed and said, "The last time we met was at Qian Pass. I didn't expect to meet again here." Deking also laughed and said, "Haha, Captain Zhao Wu, Mr. Chang Sun, it's been a long time. We are here to take you home." Lu Su then laughed and said, "Captain Zhao, Mr. Chang Sun, we made a big noise this time. Your Majesty's kindness, I can't repay it, even if I die 1,000 times." Chang Sun Sheng said, bowing his hands and bowing to Nan Fang with gratitude. Zhao Wu also had a serious face, bowed his hands, and bowed to Nan Fang with gratitude, and said, "Your Majesty's kindness, I can't repay it even if I die." "Come on, this is not a place to talk, let's talk while walking." Lu Su looked at the direction Zhao Wu and Chang Sun Sheng were coming from, and stretched out his hand to lead them. Deking directly gave a loud order. The whole army returns in triumph. After Lu Su waited for Deking to give the order, he said to Zhao Wu and Chang Sun Sheng, "We have reported the situation here to the Emperor, and the Emperor is waiting for us in Qian City." Zhao Wu said excitedly, "Then let's go." Seeing his somewhat impatient look, it seems that he has not had an easy time in the north during this period. Chang Sun Sheng also said with some emotion, "Our caravan has been out for a month, and it can be said to be twists and turns. Now we can finally go back. You too. In addition to taking you back to the interior, we also teach these ignorant territories some lessons. It can be said that we have gained a lot." Deking had already arranged the army at this time, turned his head and smiled slightly. Haha, the invincible journey led by General D is well known even in other territories. Chang Sun Sheng replied immediately after hearing Deking's words. Lu Su stroked his beard and asked curiously, "Oh, Mr. Chang Sun, what do the other 3 territories in the north say? How do they view their country's expedition?" Chang Sun Sheng heard Lu Su's question and laughed. "Yes, the other 3 territories also knew about this battle, but because our country is under the banner of punishing disbelief, there is no sign of sending troops to intervene." At this point, Chang Sun Sheng paused and said with a somewhat ugly expression, "Because our country's army, that is, the army led by you, General D and Staff Officer Lu, destroyed 2 cities and captured 2 lords, which made the other 3 lords very disgusted." After hearing the attitude of other forces towards the Xia Kingdom, Deking said seriously, "Just disgusted. Don't worry. As long as they don't directly send troops to intervene, everything will be fine. Yes. Besides, we just invited the 2 lords to be guests in our military camp temporarily. Where did the prisoners come from? When we return to Tangdao, we won't retain the 2 guests." Lu Su also agreed with Deking's point of view, but he didn't seem to agree with his powers view, and he was joking seriously. Ha ha ha. After hearing Lu Su's words, the others couldn't help laughing, and even Lu Su couldn't help laughing. "Colonel Lu is really a funny person." Chang Sun Sheng laughed and said, "That's right. Where did we get the captives? They are all invited VIPs. Haha." Lu Su then laughed and said, "That's right, no matter whether others believe it or not. Anyway, we just declare it to the outside world." Deking and Zhao Wu looked at each other and smiled. They were serious warriors, a little different from the other 2 wise men, and didn't have so much to say. So Deking and Zhao Wu were just listening most of the time, and occasionally said a few words, unlike Lu Su and Chang Sun Sheng, who couldn't stop talking once they started. From astronomy and geography, to the situation outside the Great Wall, exotic customs, to national development, and future forecasts, there was nothing they couldn't talk about. "Okay, you two, let's talk slowly later. Now it's time to set up camp." Deking interrupted their chat. The 2 looked up and saw the sky. It was really dark. Unknowingly, an afternoon passed. Lu Su said, "It's getting dark so quickly. I had a great time talking with you. I still feel a little reluctant to finish. The same goes for me. I can't compare to the knowledge of Lu Su, especially his mastery of military affairs." Chang Sun Sheng bowed to Lu Su to show his admiration. Lu Su raised his hand in a hurry and said, "What are you talking about, Mr. Chang Sun? Your understanding of the forces outside the Great Wall and the people from foreign lands is far from yours. I'm the one who has learned from you." Just as Chang Sun Sheng was about to say something, Zhao Wu popped up and said, "If you two keep admiring me, you can stay here all night." Lu Su and Chang Sun Sheng looked at each other and laughed. "Captain Zhao is right. I admire you." After that, he patted his horse and rushed to the front to help, regardless of Zhao Wu's expression of "Are you kidding me?" and doubting his life. On the way back, Deking and Lu Su told Zhao Wu and Chang Sun Sheng about the process of the expedition and stayed on the battlefield outside the small town of Kevin's territory for a while. Zhao Wu and Chang Sun Sheng looked at the dark land and listened to Lu Su's narration. They could imagine the fierce battle at that time, as if they heard the enemy's unwilling roar before despair. War. Chang Sun Sheng didn't say anything else, just sighed like this. Zhao Wu listened to Chang Sun Sheng's sigh and said, "Who asked these people to be our enemy?" 3 days later, Deking and Lu Su led the infantry brigade to the place of their first battle. It was also here that the Xia Kingdom had its first casualties. "General, we shouldn't send off the 2 distinguished guests we invited. Let them stay." Lu Su touched his beard and said to Deking with a smile. Deking slapped his forehead and said, "Look at my memory. If you hadn't told me, I would have forgotten the 2 distinguished guests we invited." Then he ordered his personal soldiers, "Go and let our 2 distinguished guests stay. Remember to tell them not to send off again." Deking deliberately emphasized this sentence, especially the words "don't send off again," which were emphasized as the most important thing. I don't know what it meant. Finally, he told his personal soldiers, "Do you understand?" The personal soldiers understood and said, "I understand, General. I will go now, and I will definitely let the distinguished guests stay." After that, he rode forward to pass on the order. Not long after, the personal soldiers reported that the distinguished guest had stayed and had reluctantly returned to the Northern Territory. Another day passed, and all the people who went on this expedition returned to the Cheyenne Pass. Arriving here, it is considered to be truly home. Chapter 140, Triumphant Again. Arriving at Cheyenne Pass, Zhang Wei had been waiting for a long time. When Zhang Wei saw Deking, Zhao Wu and others, he rode forward and clasped his fists and said, "General D, Staff Officer Lu, Captain Zhao, Mr. Changson, welcome back home. Haha. Battalion Commander Zhang, you have worked hard to guard Cheyenne Pass during this period." Deking clasped his fists in return and laughed. Logically speaking, Deking was the commander of a brigade with the rank of Major General, and he didn't need to be so polite to Zhang Wei, a small battalion commander and lieutenant colonel. But they both reported directly to the monarch Yang Song, and since they were not subordinate to each other, they still had to have the minimum respect. Zhang Wei clasped his fists again and said, "This is the king's order. I'm just following orders. General D, you don't have to be polite." Zhang Wei was still as straightforward as ever, and said directly, "The king has ordered us to continue to hold on here, and let General D lead the infantry brigade to Cheyenne City. Since it is the king's order, then this general dare not delay here." After speaking, he turned his head and ordered behind him, "Keep moving forward. Target, Cheyenne City." "Yes. Follow the general's order," the soldiers shouted in response. Cheyenne Pass is about 200 kilometers away from Cheyenne City, and the infantry brigade, accompanied by artillery, wounded soldiers, carriages, and caravans, can only travel 40 to 50 kilometers a day at most. With such a long distance, the entire team will take at least 5 days to arrive. Therefore, Deking ordered to set off as soon as possible and not to delay at Cheyenne Pass. In addition, Deking knew that the two armies should not be too familiar with each other. At his level, these basic politics will still be involved more or less. Again, even if Yang Song, the monarch, would not have any objections, other people would have many ideas in their eyes. Lu Su asked people to bring the wounded soldiers of the infantry brigade who arrived at Cheyenne Pass in advance together with the doctors to the team. It was his duty to do these auxiliary things. "We have military duties, so General D forgives us for not being able to send us far away." Zhang Wei waved his hand to make way, clasped his fists and said, "General D, Staff Officer Lu, Captain Zhao, Mr. Changson, go slowly. Captain Zhang, goodbye, see you in Cheyenne City in the future." Zhao Wu smiled and clasped his fists. Changson Sheng and others also saluted Zhang Wei, and then urged their horses to hurry up and catch up with the team. Finally, before dusk on the 5th day, the entire team finally arrived outside Cheyenne City. "General D, should we rest here for one night and enter the city in high spirits tomorrow?" Changson Sheng looked at the gradually familiar environment around him, looked at the faintly visible Cheyenne City a few kilometers ahead, and then looked back at the extremely exhausted team, and couldn't help but suggest. Deking replied without turning his head, "No, this is the team that the king wants to see. Moreover, I have already sent someone to inform the news that we will arrive today. At this time, Cheyenne City should have been prepared to welcome us." After hearing Changson Sheng's answer, Changson Sheng looked back at the team behind him again. Looking carefully, he found that the soldiers belonging to the infantry brigade and the team were also covered in dust, but they were fine, not so tired. The other personnel were not so energetic, they were really abnormally tired. If you don't look carefully, you won't know. These soldiers covered in dust and dust made him very surprised. What kind of army is this? After traveling all the way together, Changson Sheng only discovered the subtle differences between these soldiers at this time. It can only be said that these dust and his first sense made him a little careless. "Hey, I'm back, and my guard has been relaxed unconsciously. Ha. It's true." Changson Sheng laughed at himself in his heart and didn't continue talking. After he came out of the customs, especially in the northern Shangdao territory, he was really relaxed after a long period of mental vigilance and the battle of wits and courage in the city of Shangdao when his retreat was blocked. After meeting Deking and others, he really relaxed. This time he was relaxed, and he didn't think so much. It was also very tiring to run the brain for a long time. Cheyenne City, outside the North City Bridge, a team of cavalry came to the front of the team and said loudly in unison, "The king has ordered." The triumphant army enters the city. When Deking and Lusu heard the king's order, they immediately clasped their fists and said seriously, "The last general/minister obeys the order." Deking looked at the team behind him who had arranged the queue, waved forward, and ordered loudly, "All troops, enter the city." The drawbridge at the north gate had long disappeared, and there was only a broad road. The wide open gates and clean streets showed that they were ready to welcome the triumphant army back. Deking rode on a warhorse, followed closely by Lusu, leading all the officers and soldiers of the regular infantry brigade to march into the city. After the soldiers of the brigade, it was the caravan, led by Zhao Wu and Chang Sheng, who followed behind. They were also part of the triumphant army. When Deking stepped through the city gate first, and when he stood on the main road of the North City, fireworks exploded, salutes roared, colorful flags fluttered, flowers greeted them, and the people lined the streets, singing loudly. The same scene, the same treatment, but the difference was the triumphant army. The grand triumphant ceremony, the officials and people lining the streets to welcome them, made these soldiers in armor, and with scars, feel no tremor at all, as if all this was just a dream, and yet it was right in front of them. They lined up in relatively neat rows, with relatively neat rhythms, and stepped in relatively neat steps. As for why it is relative, that's because many soldiers are injured. Such an army is more simple, and makes the people on both sides know the horror of war. But now is the glorious moment for the soldiers, so what they should do at this time is to enjoy it to their heart's content. They are qualified to enjoy it. Enjoy the attention. Enjoy the praise. Enjoy. On the straight and wide main road in the north, the army that went out to conquer has returned triumphantly. As the soldiers of the infantry brigade entered the city, the caravan also entered the city. I didn't expect that I would have this day. Zhao Wu looked at the people and officials cheering on the road and felt very emotional. He used to think that such a scene would be far away from him, but he didn't expect that such a day and such a moment would come to him. He knew that all this was brought to him by Yang Song. It was Yang Song, the monarch, who gave him this opportunity. This made him feel so moved and grateful to Yang Song, the monarch, as he has never been like this before. Now even if Yang Song asked him to die immediately, Zhao Wu would not blink an eye to execute it. And he would also ask how and in what posture he should die. He would execute perfectly according to the king's order. This is what is called die-hard loyalty. Along the main road, marching to the outside of the council hall, under the command of officers at all levels, all the soldiers of the infantry brigade lined up in Cheyenne Square, looking at Yang Song in front of them, their king. Deking got off his horse first, and also walked forward to the steps, knelt on one knee, holding the king's order given by Yang Song when he went to the expedition, and said loudly, "General Deking, come to report." Chapter 141, Resting Spirit. Yang Song raised his hand and said, "No need to be polite, you have completed my order." Wan Wei, who was standing next to him, had already trotted to Deking's side, took the token with both hands, returned to the stage, and handed it to Yang Song respectfully. After Yang Song took it, he put it on the tray next to him. Turning to Deking, who stood up, and everyone present, he said loudly, "The soldiers who went out to fight have returned victoriously, and I will reward them for their merits." He looked around again and continued, "Award the infantry brigade for the first-class military merit. Award Deking for the second-class military merit. Award Lusu for the third-class military merit." Then came the caravan's return ceremony. Yang Song also awarded them the honor of collective outstanding contribution, and Zhao Wu and Chang Sheng for their individual contribution honors. Yang Song also did not forget the militiamen who were silently sitting in the back and contributing, and rewarded them with a collective contribution reward. After giving the reward, Yang Song smiled and said, "All the soldiers, officials, and people who have gone out of the customs have worked hard. I welcome you home. You have won, and now you can cheer as much as you want." As soon as Yang Song finished speaking, everyone under the steps cheered loudly, including the onlookers. Many of their relatives were in the militia, and they were all cheering for this. The mobilization of the militia this time also reached 10,000 people. Only when the passage was built last time, more people were mobilized than this time. The number of mobilized transport carriages reached an unprecedented 150, which was to transport the food and goods looted in the front as soon as possible, and to better transport food, ammunition, and supplies from the rear. Each of these carriages ran back and forth twice to complete all the transportation tasks. If the 60 carriages of the caravan are counted, 210 carriages were dispatched this time, which is considered to be all the transport carriages of the Zaya Kingdom. If there hadn't been food shipped back to the front for the natives to eat, and the second rice harvest of the year had not been harvested not long ago, Xiago would not be able to withstand such a large consumption. It can be said that both wars used the power of the whole country. The first time was the power of all 60,000 people, and this time it was the power of 80,000 people and tens of thousands of natives in the country, and the war would be won. But the number of people and military strength dispatched twice were completely different. There was only an ordinary guard battalion when the Nanman was punitive, but this time it was an infantry brigade with strong firepower. From more than 1,000 people to more than 3,000 people now, this is more than 3 times the number of people, and the combat power has been increased by an unknown number of times. The combat power has been improved, but the national strength of Xiago has basically been consumed. A lot of food was consumed last time, and a lot of ammunition was consumed this time. The consumption is not small, and the harvest is not small. The hostile forces in the north were defeated, and other territories were intimidated. The caravan was taken back, and a total of 460,000 kilograms of food was traded and looted. As long as Xiago can digest and develop it well, it will have stronger strength. At that time, even if the other 3 territories come to attack together, Xiago will not be afraid. In addition to these triumphant warriors, those warriors who died in the war have already arrived in Xianqi City. At this moment, these warriors who died in the war have rested. Some time ago, the people of the whole city had lined the streets to welcome these warriors who died in the war, but these martyrs had no relatives, so there were fewer sad people. So when the people learned why these martyrs died under the propaganda, although they were sad and upset, they had fewer tears. The people may remember it now, but it is not certain in the future. After all, people are forgetful. It is for this reason that Yang Song ordered the construction of the Hall of Heroes in the Martyrs Park. The Hall of Heroes in the Martyrs Park, as the name suggests, are the resting places of heroes and martyrs. In memory of these heroes and martyrs who sacrificed their lives for the country. They are located on a hillside not far northeast of Xianqi City, a beautiful and quiet place. In just a few days, a small temple was built halfway up the mountain. Although it was simple, no one dared to look down on it. Behind the temple is the cemetery. Now there are only 54 tombstones, each of which reads the curtain of the heroic martyr XX of the Zaya Kingdom. It can be foreseen that more and more soldiers will come here to rest in peace in the future. Yang Song brought all the officials of Xianqi City and came here on the same day to hold a grand but heavy ceremony of entering the spirit. On that day, the sky was gloomy and drizzling, as if he couldn't bear the exposure of the golden crow to disturb this line of brave warriors, and it was drizzling to clear the dust of time. Yang Song wore a black ceremonial robe with a small white flower on his left chest. Other officials, like Yang Song, wore black dresses with a small white flower on his left chest. They were solemn and walked into the temple step by step with heavy steps following Yang Song. As a monarch, it is also necessary to see off the soldiers this time. Whether in name or in fact, he is the supreme commander of the national military. So, Yang Song is here. He personally shoveled up the first shovel of soil and covered the urn that was put down. Yang Song had ordered a long time ago, all soldiers who died in the war must be cremated. In addition to avoiding decay, it can also reduce transportation costs and burial costs. Of course, this is completely based on practical considerations, and external publicity is another matter. In fact, no matter from what angle, cremation is the best choice. He is going to change the bad habit of burial. There is no need to say much about the disadvantages of burial. The first point is that it occupies land. The current Zaya Kingdom does not lack this land. But what about the future? What about dozens, hundreds, or thousands of years later? The second point is cost. The cost of a coffin is not comparable to that of an urn. There are also labor costs, transportation costs. The third point is from a sentimental point of view. Facing a tombstone, what is the difference between a corpse or a handful of ashes buried in it? After Yang Song sent off these martyrs who sacrificed their lives for the country, he returned to Shianqi City and issued several orders. His first order was, for all the martyrs who are loyal to the country, the Xia Kingdom must relieve their worries, and the relief of their fathers, mothers, wives, and the upbringing of their descendants will all be taken care of by the country. The second order, sacrificing to the heroic spirits and martyrs, is a major event for the country and for me. From the monarch to the officials, and from the people, everyone must do it. Finally, he said to Yang Li seriously, publicize it well, so that the people of the country know who is protecting them, who is carrying the burden forward. I obey your order. Yang Li also took the order with a serious face. Without saying much, he directly started the propaganda machine, and carried out a full-scale propaganda campaign, which will continue. There are many things to do after returning triumphantly. The most important thing is to treat the wounded. In addition, it is to replenish the vacancies. But these elite soldiers are not so easy to replenish. Finally, Yang Song ordered the guard camp of Shianqian Pass to cooperate with Deking to select soldiers from the soldiers of the guard camp to supplement the advanced infantry brigade. Because the infantry brigade is the most powerful army in Xia State, first of all, ensuring their perfection is the top priority. At the same time, Deking led his army back to Shianqian Pass and stationed there. The soldiers of the guard camp will also return to Shianqi City, and even the 10 artillery pieces have all been pulled back. It's not that they are stingy, but the weapons and equipment of the infantry brigade are very complete. It doesn't matter whether there are these city defense artillery pieces or not. So it's better to use it to train some artillery for the soldiers of the guard camp. As for the gaps in the guard camp, they will be selected from the militia, from a large number of voluntary militias. There are really a lot of voluntary militias. Chapter 142 Digestion Development. After arranging the army, it is time to digest the fruits of this victory. Everyone, the benefits of this war are obvious. Let's talk about how to use these results. At the regular meeting 10 days later, Yang Song spoke first as usual. He wanted to use the wisdom of everyone, so that he could make decisions. After 10 days, the arrangements that should be arranged have been arranged, and the statistics that should be counted have been completed. It is time to hold a meeting to discuss future development. Your Majesty. Yang Song spoke first as usual. The rice transported back can be used to recruit people, and other food can be allocated to the southern barbarians and northern barbarians. He also glanced at Chenping, obviously saying that the northern barbarians are all in your hands. Yang Song nodded and said, let's distribute it like this. Calculate how much development can be accelerated in Xiaoglo. Yang Song replied, it can save 460,000 kilograms of food in the country. Increase the number of people by nearly 50,000. Yang Song's answer made Yang Song very satisfied. That is to say, 50,000 people can be added now, but in this way, there will be a gap in food again, because the recruited people also need to eat. Yang Song therefore gave the order, recruit 20,000 civilians. First, let the number of Xia Kingdom exceed 100,000. Yes, I obey your order. Because the authority to recruit civilians can be delegated, and can be taken back at any time, the delegated authority to recruit civilians does not mean that Yang Song also has a system interface. After Yang Song delegated the authority to recruit civilians to Yang Song, as long as Yang Song came to the refugee camp, his consciousness would be connected to the refugee camp, and he could naturally recruit, as if there were really many refugees in the refugee camp. After Yang Song took the order and sat down, Chang Sheng stood up and bowed, saying, Your Majesty, the northern forces outside the pass now know the strength of our country. I suggest that we can continue to send caravans to sell some ordinary things in exchange for more food and intelligence. This time, out of the 20 carts of goods, only 10 carts of ordinary goods were sold. This was a mistake on his part, so he suggested that we sell those ordinary goods in the future. Anyway, these goods are already considered a treasure in the eyes of the forces outside the pass. Chang Sheng's suggestion was exactly what he wanted, but Yang Song was worried that after this war, the northern forces would not dare to do business with him, so he asked about this concern. Chiang Sheng replied, the four northern territories no longer have much food, and after this war, they will not dare to stop us in a short time, so there will be no obstacles to trade with other territories. After listening to Chiang Sheng's explanation, Yang Song nodded happily and agreed, very good. Zhao Wu, you will be responsible for guarding the caravan in the future. Yes, I obey your command. Zhao Wu took the order without saying anything, and it seemed that he was still willing to do this job. As for Chiang Sheng, his job was a diplomat. He might accompany the caravan to the border, or he might not. Then Chen Ping stood up and bowed his hands and said, Your Majesty, the mountain training base has been built, and the extra southern barbarians have been handed over to Director Yang. The training has begun. Chen Ping just made a simple report. He reported the details to Yang Song at any time. At the meeting, he was just going through the process. Well, I know. Yang Song hummed, and Chen Ping sat down with him. Next is the report of other departments. There is nothing new, just a routine work report. All our daily work such as the number of new population in civil affairs, the construction of post station transportation, and the construction progress of the northern central town. In the report of Zhang Yu, the person in charge of the engineering bureau, the construction of the central town is about to be completed. After completion, a cross-river bridge on the passage can be built, and the temporary floating bridge will be cancelled. Other departments responsible for land development, resource utilization, public security, trial, etc. will also send officials to station there to ensure the rule and development of this place. Other aspects are the use of guano, most of which is used to make fertilizers, and a small part is used to make saltpeter, to replenish the inventory of ammunition. It is expected that the harvest of grain next season will be greatly improved. From the current situation, the improvement of grain production by fertilizer is far more than 3 layers, but how much will be known when it is harvested. And the various mines in the country, as well as the Nanman on Phelang Island, are all very obedient and working hard to mine ores. Those who don't obey have already been dealt with. Yang Song is now considering what name to use to upgrade the level of each department from bureau to department. Because there have been regulations for a long time, there is not enough merit, and it is not necessary, so he can't upgrade the level of each department casually. He can only hope that these departments can make enough contributions at the end of the year, otherwise, it is impossible to upgrade just by seniority. On the other hand, Yang Song feels that the current system is a little imperfect, but if he wants to adjust it, he doesn't know where to start. He once again hopes that there will be a great talent in internal affairs to help him. This is not the first time that he is so eager for the reward of the system, but he also knows that relying on the system alone can't solve anything, and in the end he can only rely on himself. Hey, relying on myself, I don't know how many years and generations it will take to develop, to achieve the goal in his heart to bloom the great and dazzling light of Chinese civilization in this world. He firmly believes that the achievement of this goal is a matter of time, but time is a problem. He knows that without the system, it will be impossible in his lifetime. Fortunately, he has a system. Now he has been waiting for the system's reward. According to his guess, the first stage of the second main task should have been completed. Why hasn't the reward been issued yet? The first stage, establish communication with a local indigenous civilization. Tip, go to conquer by force and communicate peacefully. Task reward, mature steam engine technology. After reading this task, you can know why Yang Song wants to go to the border. Not only the real threat, but also the need for the task. Since establishing communication doesn't work, then I will conquer you. This is his last reason for going to the border. Wait, conquer? Yang Song looked at the word and muttered to himself thoughtfully, but defeating the enemy is not considered conquering. It must be occupied. The more he guessed, the more he confirmed his idea. No wonder the reward is so high. One of the universal rules of this world is that you cannot occupy the territory of a lord. The national strength of Xia has not yet reached the point of being an enemy of the world, so it cannot be occupied. It can only withdraw to the border, which is not considered a conquest. In contrast, he estimated that the threshold for peaceful exchanges was not low, but this was the only way now, and he could only look forward to the caravan's future performance. Yang Song opened the small map and looked at the map outside the Great Wall, especially the entire basin and the entire coastline in the east, thinking deeply. He lowered his head and picked up the pen to write down a series of orders. He was going to make some adjustments to future development. Lord's order. Speed up the construction of sea vessels. Lord's order. Increase the reserves of ammunition and weapons. Lord's order. Temporarily postpone the construction of new towns, increase the number of new villages, and make every effort to develop the existing territory and increase grain production. Lord's order. Make every effort to increase steel production. The goal is to reach a monthly output of 1,000 tons of high quality steel by the end of this year. Lord's order. Accept strong refugees from outside the Great Wall and fill them into the iron mine. Their status is equivalent to that of prisoners of war. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 143, Xia Kingdom. Now the 3 warships of the Xia Kingdom Navy have completely become training ships. When the construction of the 3 transport ships is completed, there will be a big gap in the demand for sailors. So in order to prevent such a situation, Yang Song ordered Li Bao to train sailors and train officers. After receiving the order, Li Bao immediately selected personnel in the country, especially those who are good at water, have been to sea, and have experience. None of them were let go by him. As for officers, he could only continue to train existing sailors and low-level officers. The people recruited from the civilians still need to undergo a long period of training before they can be competent for the positions of ordinary crew members, but officers are completely different, especially important positions such as captains and captains. Without certain professional knowledge, they cannot do this. So Li Bao only trained the original low-level officers and sailors because he has a deep understanding of these men. The fleet's plan to explore the north was interrupted again and again, which made Yang Song very helpless. Fortunately, Xia Kingdom has not found any enemies overseas, so there is no urgent need for the navy. Because of this, the navy seems to have become an insignificant role in Xia state, with a very low sense of existence. Fortunately, Yang Song knows the importance of the navy, and did not burn it all down like the ancient rulers. Moreover, the navy has also made meritorious contributions. It has found various resource-rich islands overseas, understood the offshore sea conditions, and trained a group of sailors and crew members. Therefore, no official dared to complain that the navy has a large amount of resources. This large amount is not just a little big, but is measured by the national strength of Xia state. Shipbuilding workers, shipbuilding materials, high wages for the navy, and a large amount of material supplies for each dispatch. These consumptions are not small at all. The current navy has completely deviated from the main business and started a sideline business, either as a transport ship or as a training ship. Even so, the Eastern Sea area can be regarded as the back garden of Xia state, the southern wasteland of Xia state. Since the guard camp hunted in this wasteland, it has become even more desolate. Wild beasts are rampant, and weeds are growing wildly. If it weren't for the subtropical monsoon climate and abundant rain, there would have been a prairie fire here. Further south, the temperature becomes hotter and the rain is more. Looking at the map, it seems to have entered the tropics. Except for the war period, the never-ending exploration also made Xia Guo more and more clear about its location. In addition to this vast wasteland in the south, there are also rivers. Overall, there is only one main stream, a river spanning north and south. To be precise, a river flowing from southeast to northwest. The source of this river comes from the rainforest further south. This rainforest is also extremely mysterious even from the outside. According to the words of the cavalry, you can tell at a glance that this is a place you must not enter. After searching the entire wasteland, no natives who escaped were found. It is estimated that all the remaining natives ran into this rainforest. After Yang Song learned of the news, he just marked it on the map and stopped paying attention. These primitive natives should not cause any harm to the current Xia Guo. He just looked at this uninhabited wasteland, thinking, estimating how many cities to build here, how many counties and towns to set up, how many people to use it, and how much land to open up, and how much food to harvest after using it. Anyway, this wasteland has been included in the territory of Zaya State by him, although there is no one in it, and the area is unknown how many times larger than the current developed area. The territory displayed by the system has reached 500,000 square kilometers, but in fact, the current Zaya State has only used more than 100,000 square kilometers of land, which also includes Cheyenne Pass, Central Town and the entire passage. The wasteland in the south is much larger. After a simple estimation and comparison by Yang Song, this wasteland has reached more than 1.5 million square kilometers, including overseas islands, and not counting sea areas. The total area is more than 2 million square kilometers, which is a quarter of the former Huaxia state. Even if there is such a large land, it is useless. The total population of Zaya State, which barely reaches 100,000 people, is not as large as the population of a county before. This is such a vast land with few people. Even if the land area is 500,000 square kilometers, 100,000 people can each get 5 square kilometers of land. One person has 5 square kilometers. Not 5 square meters, but mu. One person can own 7,500 mu of land. And the upper limit of the land of Zaya State is not even this number. This made Yang Song want to abolish the upper limit of land, but he thought about it in a blink of an eye. It is not enough now, but it may not be in the future, especially after having steam engine technology, so he still did not abolish this rule. The west of Zaya State's main activity range is also the northwest of the wasteland, which is the large forest. This forest provides Zaya State with a lot of wood, from hundreds of thousands of years old giant trees used as shipbuilding keels and pillars for building palaces, to practical wood such as oak and sandalwood, and to wood and charcoal used for cooking, all of which have contributions from this forest. Unfortunately, it is precisely because of such a lush forest, with dangerous animals and plants, and the terrain is also very complicated. Therefore, the exploration activities dare not go deep at all, so Yang Song does not know the world behind. The north is a completely mountainous area with rich minerals, but mining and transportation are very difficult. Now we can only mine the outer edge, and the long passage can also be used on both sides. Isn't there a saying called, if you want to be rich, build roads first? The wealth that this passage can create cannot be explained in 2 or 3 sentences. Especially after the construction of the Cheyenne Pass. Even if the forces outside the pass are connected, the Zaya Kingdom has no worries. Just like this time, the forces outside the pass are hostile to the Zaya Kingdom. As long as there is a Cheyenne Pass, the Zaya Kingdom can attack and defend, and take the initiative. The final result ended with a complete defeat of the 4 small territories, which further illustrates the strategic importance of this location. Now the outside of the pass is simply a hell on earth. Grass roots, leaves, bark, white soil, as long as they can be eaten, all went into the stomachs of these civilians. There are countless civilians who starve to death. Cannibalism often occurs. Homeless refugees are scattered, blindly looking for that ray of hope. The lords and nobles would not care about these desperate untouchables. They only knew how to repair castles and manors, close the gates and enjoy themselves, and calm down the panic after the shock, but this shadow has been following them for the rest of their lives. These people now, like Kevin, who have experienced the baptism of artillery, will tremble with fear, even if it is an ordinary thunder. They have used up their last bit of courage not to crawl under the table. The other 3 larger territories all accepted some civilians to a certain extent, but they also picked and chose again, and the remaining refugees who were looked down upon were all driven out of their territories. Such forces outside the pass, even if they want to retaliate, they no longer have the time. For the Zaya Kingdom, there is no threat from outside the pass for the time being. Chapter 144 A New Stage. That's why Yang Song instructed that some civilians outside the pass could be selectively accepted. For example, strong men, young girls, and young children. Men can be used for mining, girls can be used to replace the unqualified southern barbarians, and children can be trained as death warriors. The caravan of Zaya State has set off again, this time with 10 carts of ordinary goods, 20 empty carriages, and a brigade of guards. In less than a month, Zhao Wu came back and brought back information from outside the pass. Your Majesty, the refugees outside the pass are scattered like locusts. Wherever they go, the grass, trees, soil, and rocks are all eaten clean. After Zhao Wu came back, he met Yang Song and directly reported the tragic situation outside the pass. He seemed to remember the tragic scenes again, sighed, and then said, "Those who have a little strength will become bandits and rob everywhere. I don't know how many such bandits I have encountered along the way." Yang Song listened to Zhao Wu's story expressionlessly. He knew that all this was because of this war. He was a mature monarch, not a hot-blooded brave man, who would talk about justice and right and wrong. He only talks about interests, the interests of Zhao state. Even if we have to talk about these, it is not because of the greed of these lords. If they had not taken advantage of the situation and intercepted the caravan, there would be no war later. And there are not so many ifs in this world. Well, you have worked hard. It is so chaotic outside the pass. You should take a rest for a while. Yang Song nodded, and after comforting Zhao Wu, he let him go. After learning about the situation outside the pass, Yang Song felt relieved. This was not because he was cold-blooded and ruthless, but because his position determined his thinking angle. For him, the monarch and the Zhao state, the more chaotic the north is now, the better, and it would be even more perfect if it continued like this. Unfortunately, he also knew that, even if it was chaotic, there would be a deadline. When almost everyone died, and the grain was harvested again, the chaos would naturally dissipate. But Yang Song was ready to develop steadily and strengthen himself during the period of chaos on the other side, so as to be ready to meet new challenges. In the continuous development, 2 years passed like this, and the Zhao state became more and more powerful. It is now the end of March in the 5th year of Cheyenne Qi, and a 1-month conference and a quarterly meeting are being held at the same time. Your Majesty, in the new year, in early spring March, 50,000 new civilians have been recruited, and more than 500 new infants have been added. Now, there are more than 300,000 people in Zhao Kingdom. Yang Zhang took a memorial, unfolded it, and began to report to Yang Song and other officials. The remaining 2 towns on the northern passage have been completed, namely Shangdao Town and Xiadao Town, which form the 3 nodes of the passage with the central town in the middle of the passage. There are nearly 2 million acres of farmland, 50,000 hectares of pasture, 5 forest farms, and 2 large mines in addition to Felang Island, 1 iron mine, 1 coal mine, and more than 10 other small mines. Yang Zhang roughly reported the development situation in recent times. In fact, in addition to the 2 newly built towns reported by Yang Zhang just now, between Linkai Town and Mushao Town, a little further southwest, a new development town has been added in the past 2 years, named Anan Town, which focuses on land reclamation and farming, supplemented by grazing. With so many fields, about 800,000 tons of grain can be harvested in a quarter. Because of fertilizers and excellent grain varieties, the grain yield per mu is more than 500 kilograms. Of course, not all fields are used to grow staple foods such as rice, wheat, and potatoes. There are also cash crops such as vegetables, fruits, and cotton and linen. Otherwise, more than 1 million tons of grain can be produced every quarter. Your Majesty, the tax revenue this quarter has increased by 1 level compared to the previous quarter, and the revenue and expenditure have basically reached a balance. This is also due to the policy proposed by the monarch to encourage private workshops to meet domestic demand. Qian Liang has never felt so relaxed as he does now. Finally, the finances have finally reached a balance between revenue and expenditure. He has asked the monarch to fill the fiscal gap for 3 years, and he feels ashamed to say it out. Your Majesty, the chaos outside the pass has been completely quelled. According to the information I have explored, the 4 small territories have begun to recover, and the 3 large territories have grown a lot during the chaotic period. Chen Ping's intelligence is still the same as usual, but he only mentioned a little bit of what he can say, because the usual intelligence is reported directly to Yang Song in a timely manner. However, Chang Sheng's diplomatic department had nothing to report. After all, the caravan had not been out of the customs for several times in the past 2 years, so Yang Song let him play the role of a think tank and supervise the officials on his behalf. He personally managed the military. In addition to the infantry brigade led by Deking and Lu Su, Zhang Wei's guard battalion was also expanded to a guard brigade. The 3,500-man guard brigade also had its own artillery, a guard artillery battalion with 27 city guard artillery. The Xianqian Pass was finally not guarded by the regular infantry brigade all year round, but alternated with the guard brigade for defense, so the soldiers of the infantry brigade soon formed their own families. These soldiers had high military pay and no place to spend it. In the eyes of the people, this was a sweet potato. Yang Song's close guards also expanded to a battalion of 1,100 people. In addition to security needs, he expanded the guards as a military police or strategic reserve. Military police are easy to understand, and the so-called strategic reserve refers to the army that can make the final decision at a critical moment. Unfortunately, it is just a concept now, and does not have the combat power. Because as the monarch's guards, they have a very high status, and the soldiers are selected from the best, and all equipment is given priority. Therefore, when they are free, they are sent to other armies, in turn to serve as military police to supervise and check the soldiers' discipline and style. However, in Xia state, military police are not called military police, but guards. In the eyes of soldiers, these guards play the role of military police. In other words, in the current Xia state, in addition to the militia, the regular army also has 8,100 people. In the council hall, the report continued. Your Majesty, the university school outside Xianqi City has been built, and the majors currently offered are administration, astronomy, agriculture, smelting, machinery, chemical engineering, mathematics, architecture, foreign languages, law, etc. ZHUZ is responsible for the education of Xia state. Although he was the founder of ZHU near Confucianism and his status was as high as the sky in this world, he is just a dedicated educator who works hard for the education of the people. Although he has a desire for fame and fortune, it is not a bad thing. As long as he can manage the education of Xia state, Yang Song will not be stingy with a few medals. ZHUZ continued to report. In addition to the middle schools in Xianqi City, the central town in the north, Annan town in the southwest, and Gufeng town in the southeast, these three places have also built middle schools. As for the primary schools in every town and the elementary schools in every village, he did not report it again, because this is standard. Just like the government, it is necessary. And all the schools were built by Yang Song privately, otherwise with the current finances of Xia state, it would have gone bankrupt long ago. He did this not to be a sucker, but because education is related to the foundation of a country and a nation. Without education, the current Xia kingdom would not have developed so fast. Moreover, the ideological education courses of patriotism and loyalty to the emperor that Yang Song asked the school to add can deeply strengthen his rule. Chapter 145 Development Bottleneck. After ZHUZ finished his report and sat down, Shen Kuo from the Science and Technology Bureau stood up and reported. Your Majesty, the current research and development of science and technology is all focused on steam engines. The progress of research and development has made a breakthrough, and the test machine has been completed. Yang Song was very happy when he heard that Shen Kuo had made a breakthrough in the research and development of steam engines and even made a prototype. He asked, "How is the steam engine?" Shen Kuo's face was still very calm, without the slightest excitement. He replied, "Your Majesty, although the prototype can operate, it occupies a large area, the output is not as expected, and the noise is also loud. It only solves the breakthrough of having and not having. So that's it." Yang Song calmed down his excitement and nodded as a matter of course. He also knew that this thing couldn't be rushed. Although he knew that there was such a thing as a steam engine and knew some ways to use it, such as trains and factories, he used to study liberal arts, and the sciences were only what he learned in junior high school, and he had forgotten everything. Otherwise, he could do the research and development himself, and even develop internal combustion engines and electric motors. Unfortunately, he only knew these things, and it was okay to use them simply. The rest was 9 out of 10, nothing. The little principles he knew had already been told to Shen Kuo a long time ago, such as reciprocating motion and cylinders. As long as he could think of them, he had said everything. As for whether it was useful, it depended on the ability of Shen Kuo and others. It was just a false joy. Yang Song thought to himself, alas, I can only complete the task and wait for the system's reward. Shen Kuo now has a group of people in the research institute, all of whom are excellent personnel who graduated from middle schools. Although they can only help, it is better than nothing. Otherwise, Shen Kuo can't even develop this prototype. Your Majesty, the latest special steel for artillery has made a major breakthrough and has reached the expected level. Thanks to Mr. Shen from the Science and Technology Bureau for his help. Lizzie then stood up and reported and saluted Shen Kuo. To talk about this matter, we have to start with the development of steam engines. One of the major problems for Shen Kuo in developing steam engines is that the materials are not up to standard, but the smelter has not made any major breakthroughs. He had no choice but to inspect it. After returning, he went directly into the library. Finally, he found the technical information about metal smelting in the mountain of information. He was busy for several months before he finally discovered the problem of the smelting plant. After correcting it, the smelting plant finally made a qualitative breakthrough. In fact, it is not a big deal. It is just that the experience is not summarized by the method of combining theory with practice. With the help of Shen Kuo, a researcher, detailed process specifications are formulated, and the shortcomings are summarized. The smelting technology has made rapid progress. Such problems are ultimately due to the lack of talents with sufficient theoretical knowledge, which are commonly known as engineers. Without these important talents, even if a full set of mature steam engine technical information is placed in front of the workers can only be confused and anxious. But what's the use of being anxious now? The university has just been built, and the first batch of students will not be admitted until the second half of the year. Even if they are admitted, there will not be many admitted, because there are only a few people who can be teachers. Shen Kuo can be a tutor in smelting, machinery, and chemical engineering. Zhuz can teach administration. Qin Jiashao teaches mathematicians. Chen Yu teaches agronomy. Yang Zanfu teaches astronomy. Song Xiai teaches law, detective work, etc. Li Zi can teach architecture, and Chang Sun Sheng teaches the foreign languages of this world. All teachers are part-time, and none of them can be permanent. They can only take out some time every day to teach students, and even have to take on the task of compiling teaching materials. Fortunately, there is a library, and a lot of information can be found. They just organize and summarize it, but even so, the amount of work is astonishingly large. Officials like Chang Sun Sheng, who seem to be relatively idle, have served as part-time imperial envoys under Yang Song's squeeze, not to mention other personnel. Finally, with Yang Song's consent, it was decided that they could learn and teach at the same time, and they could change and add teaching materials in the middle, and summarize experience while practicing. Anyway, this university must be put into operation and achieve zero breakthroughs. Without making this determination and overcoming difficulties, this university will never be established. There are still 2 months before the university opens. The preparations that should be done have been done. Those that have not been done can only be done forcefully. Higher education is an important direction of development at this stage. It is the stupidest idea to rely on system rewards for talents. Only what you have is the real power. After these batches of high-level talents graduate, the development of Xiaguo will break through the bottleneck in front of you. Yes, the development of Xiaguo has now fallen into a bottleneck. Productivity cannot meet the requirements. It has never been achieved. There is no shortage of labor objects. Raw materials and equipment are all available. As long as they are fully utilized, productivity can be raised. Many rewarded equipment is still gathering dust in the warehouse because they don't know how to use it. There is no shortage of labor materials. Where is the entire library placed? It is not a lack of technology, but a lack of educated technical workers. Workers are the key point of productivity and the leader of everything, but such an important element is lacking. It is not a lack of ordinary workers, but a lack of middle and high-level technical workers, especially workers who have received systematic higher education, and there is no one. Ordinary workers are very easy to solve. Birth and conscription will be satisfied sooner or later. If it doesn't work, then implement the foreign slave system. In fact, it has been implemented for a long time, but it has not been officially announced. The previous lack of productivity was caused by the lack of ordinary workers, and the requirements in other aspects were not as high as they are now. At that time, as long as they could survive, it would be fine, but now it is a problem of development. It's okay not to develop. With the current scientific and technological strength, as long as the population is suppressed, and after more than 10 or several decades, the scale will reach infinity, and it will not be difficult to push the world flat. But a few hundred years later, the country established by Yang Song will follow the old path of the previous world. There will be a change of dynasties for hundreds of years, and there will be basically no progress for thousands of years. It can only be self-contained and cycle back and forth. What is the point of establishing such a country and such a civilization? What's the use of occupying the whole world? So Yang Song sees not only the dozens, and hundreds of years in front of him, but what he sees is tens of millions of years later. He can be said to have stood on the shoulders of giants, and the previous historical experience has made him decide not to be controlled by others. Now, even if Yang Song's system disappears, Xiaoguo will not have any sequelae, but the development will become slower. For Yang Song, the function of this system was a starting point for him in the early stage, and now it is just an accelerator for his development. So, even if the system disappears, he will be troubled, but not desperate. Chapter 146 Ammunition Laws. But the bottleneck of development is not so easy to break through. According to Yang Song's prediction, according to the current development speed, without system rewards, it will take at least 10 years to make a major breakthrough. 10 years later, Xiaoguo will have enough talents with high enough knowledge. 10 years, what a long time. A person's life is only a few decades. Calculated by the time of this world, there are 380 days a year. This number may be even less. When that time comes, Xiaoguo will be estimated to have tens of millions of people according to the current population growth rate. In fact, the current population number is the result of Yang Song suppressing the speed of conscription, after thinking about many aspects. Otherwise, if the conscription is released when there is enough food, it can now reach 500,000. Yang Song only considered the strategic reserve of food, the integration of new people, and the associated costs after technological changes. So he chose to suppress the speed of conscription, but wouldn't this violate the original population growth plan? In fact, there was no change in natural fertility. Yang Song knew that after the birth of the steam engine, enough manpower was needed to operate the machine and enter the factory, so he had maximized the conscription of people. The food shortages in the previous times gave him a headache, and he had to launch a plundering war for this. So he learned from experience and established a strategic reserve granary to prevent a sudden surge in food demand. Even if a war breaks out suddenly, the food is enough to support it for a long time, and it will not have much impact on the Xia kingdom. And Yang Song has stored a large amount of gunpowder and artillery shells for the war, filling up several specially built weapons warehouses, and never has to worry about running out of ammunition again. He thought of artillery and immediately asked Lizzie, how is the musket that I asked you to try to make? With abundant gunpowder, how could he forget the musket, a killer? So he asked Lizzie to develop a flintlock musket. When Lizzie asked him what a musket was, Yang Song's introduction was a smaller version of the artillery, a hand cannon that can be operated by one person. In the end, there was really no other way, so Yang Song drew the appearance of a musket according to his memory, with a long butt, a long barrel, a trigger flintlock mechanism, etc. But there were no detailed parameters, only a look. According to Yang Song's introduction, Lizzie finally knew about such a weapon. He went back to develop it immediately, but there were many difficulties. The wooden buttstock was easy to make, just follow the instructions. Even the trigger flintlock mechanism was changed by him according to the flintlock mechanism of the cannon, and it was developed quickly. But only the inconspicuous barrel could not be successfully developed. The one cast by casting method was not qualified at all, because the inside of the barrel was not smooth, and the front and back of the hollow were inconsistent. In Lizzie's opinion, there was no need to test it. Rolling the iron sheet into a barrel shape was consistent enough, but it could not solve the airtightness problem. The seal could not be closed, and it was natural that the barrel exploded during the test. In the end, Lizzie tried every way, but still could not solve the problem of the barrel. So now Lizzie had to plead guilty. I'm guilty. The musket has not been successfully developed. Some time ago, Lizzie had reported to Yang Song on the progress of the musket development. After knowing the difficulty of developing the barrel, he just asked with hope, and he was really planning to punish him. He knew the technical difficulty of seamless steel pipes. There were no lathes or machine tools now. They all needed strong power to drive them. Yang Song had heard of industrial mother machines before, and it seemed that they were talking about precision machine tools. But now in Xiaguo, let alone precision machine tools, there were no non-precision machine tools. He knew the name of the machine tool, but he didn't know the operating principle. He didn't even know how the machine tool worked. He couldn't let Lizzie and Shen Kuo develop it, just based on a name. After waving his hand to indicate that Lizzie was fine, he sighed in his heart and felt sad for his knowledge. It would have been great if he had studied science and engineering before. Unfortunately, he studied administration, which was all about liberal arts. This was a major that even most college students used to be afraid of and didn't have in the advanced mathematics course. Therefore, part of the university's administration courses were compiled by him, which can be regarded as playing a part. There is no shortage of talents in this area. Seeing that the musket was gone, he was not in a hurry. Anyway, there was no urgent need for new weapons now, so Yang Song continued to preside over the next meeting. Your Majesty, the Xia Code has been revised for many years, and has included all the cases in recent years. It is relatively complete. Should we start the compilation plan of the Xia Constitution? Song Xi's presence in Xia is like those researchers, very low, but he plays a very important role. As the director of the Metropolitan Inspection Bureau, his original responsibility was to supervise and review whether the court's trial was illegal, but there were only a few cases in Xia for so many years, and those that were just trivial matters between neighbors. Even Xia didn't even have prisons built, and criminals who broke the law were generally sentenced to labor reform, that is, to go mining. So Song Xi's task became to formulate laws, and then the meeting decided whether they were applicable, whether the sentencing was appropriate, whether they were passed, etc. In fact, as long as he proposed the clauses, there were basically no problems. The importance of the law is self-evident. Now we finally have a relatively complete legal encyclopedia, but now we still lack a basic law from the source, the Constitution. Really? Has it been revised and improved? Yang Song asked doubtfully. In his impression, shouldn't the law always be revised? Why is it over now? Song Xi replied, Your Majesty, it is relatively complete. There are no cases that can be added now. Now Yang Song understood, that is to say, only those that have happened can be formulated, and those that have not happened cannot be formulated. This is true. Just like now Yang Song asked him to formulate a traffic law, what's the use? There are no cars, and the other party can't formulate it at all. Then Yang Song thought of what Song Xi said about formulating a constitution. This is really possible. He is a person who has studied law and knows the status of the constitution, the legalization of rule. I'm sure about the constitution. Remember to show me the first few articles after they are formulated. Yang Song wanted to know what the constitution formulated by Song Xi was about, the provisions of the ruling power. And the other party actually knew the word constitution. There was no such term in ancient China before, and he didn't know if what the other party said was the same as what he thought. But from the fact that Song Xi put forward the constitution separately, it is probably what Yang Song understood, the fundamental law of a country. This is either the credit of the system, which has instilled a lot of advanced knowledge into these rewarded talents, or the function of the library, which contains all the ancient and modern Chinese and foreign knowledge before the Industrial Revolution. Of course, there will also be legal knowledge. If Song Xi knows the role of the Constitution, Song Xi's proposal just now will make sense. Chapter 147, Lily outside the pass. Yang Song was presiding over the quarterly summary meeting in the council hall, but not only outside the northern pass, but also the various forces were not calm. The names of the 4 small territories near the Qian Pass were all named after the family names of their respective lords. For example, Kevin Bill's territory was called Bill Territory, and the name of the small town was also called Bill City. But Kevin Bill has been the lord for decades, and Bill Territory has long been called Kevin Territory. Now Kevin, the lord of Kevin Territory, is lying on the bed, and his family members all gathered around him, waiting for the last words of the lord who has led the territory for decades. Kevin suffered from anxiety because of the war 2 years ago, and his age was not young, so now his territory can only be handed over to his only heir Lily Bill. Kevin has no children, only this daughter in her 20s, but she was also married to Mike Oz, the lord of Eugene Territory in the northeast. When Lily Bill married Lord Mike Oz, Mike was only one of the heirs of the previous generation of lords, and his ranking was relatively low. After a popular marriage, a conspiracy, and a fight, Mike finally relied on foreign aid to kill several other brothers and became the lord of Eugene Territory. In fact, Mike married into Kevin Territory on the grounds that he could not compete with his brothers, but after the marriage, Mike quickly captured Lily Bill's heart with his handsome appearance and gentle and considerate personality. Lily was very unhappy about this marriage at first. She thought that she was a lord's princess and was the only heir to the territory. She was the apple of Kevin's eye. She didn't know how comfortable her life was. But suddenly a prince of a big territory came, and somehow, he persuaded her father to let this Prince Mike marry her. Lily immediately found her father and cried, but Kevin was determined to agree to this marriage. This was also the first time that Lily failed to persuade her father. The result was that after an unpleasant wedding, Lily was slowly attracted to Mike and finally fell in love completely. After staying in Kevin Territory for a few years, Mike finally borrowed 3,000 soldiers from Kevin, brought a fortune, and took advantage of the chaotic period when several heirs of Eugene Territory were fighting with their dog brains and pig brains, quickly bought the real power and dignitaries, and joined his original troops to seize the position of lord in one fell swoop. At this time, Lily knew that her father had used her for a gamble, and also knew Kevin's hard work for her good. But she still couldn't forgive Kevin for using her and concealing her, so Lily followed Mike to Eugene Territory and became the lord's wife. Mike and Lily also knew about the war 2 years ago. At that time, they both thought that this war was just a routine activity like the usual wars, so they didn't care much. But with the arrival of the battle report later, what caught them off guard and unbelievable was that Kevin's Bill City was destroyed, and their father was also captured by the enemy. By the time they realized what was happening, the war was over. In less than a month, the enemy had defeated 4 territories in a row. Although the 4 territories combined were only slightly stronger than their Eugene Territory, it was incredible that such a powerful force was defeated by the enemy. This place was not north of the Hatimteohe Mountains. When did such a powerful territory appear? Where did they come from? How strong were they? Not only did Mike want to know the answers to these questions, but the lords of the other 2 territories also wanted to know. The 4 territories that had been united against them were actually defeated, and they were defeated badly. More than 15,000 soldiers died, 2 cities were destroyed, 2 lords were captured, and countless food and supplies were looted. This was the first time they had seen such a brutal opponent. Before this, they had never seen such a force, let alone heard of it. The tragic situation after the war completely frightened the territories that did not participate. The people in the 4 small territories all had no food to eat, and I don't know how many people starved to death. Anyway, in order to make up for the losses, these lords and nobles plundered everything they could in the territories. The small mountain villages near the Olo Mountains, Cheyennean Mountains, are the key targets of looting. After the looting, the villagers in the mountain villages cannot survive and can only become refugees. These mountain villages will naturally perish. The mountain villages outside the city are not doing well, and the civilians in the city are even worse off. The people outside the city can still use wild vegetables and wild beasts to survive for a while, but the civilians in the city do not have this condition and can only go out of the city to exile. Those who become bandits are all strong. The result of refugees without strength can be imagined, exchanging children for food and chasing carrion. Mike learned that his Lord Tarzan was so miserable, and also knew the reason for the war. Although Kevin and his friends asked for it, who made the wind around them so strong, so he still provided a batch of supplies, not a lot, but at least enough to repair the castle. The next was a period of chaos that lasted for more than a year. Their 3 territories also received a group of refugees, all of whom were civilians from neighboring territories, but they did not want everyone. Even Charlie Quill, the Lord of the Bounty in the West, only took in strong refugees with hunting experience, but such civilians had long been cannon fodder, and how many of them are there now? Until the end, all those who could die died, and those who could persist persisted. The robbers had no more objects to rob, and they all started farming again, and the chaos slowly subsided. Even now, many places are still very chaotic. Not everyone is willing to farm and be exploited. Not long ago, a messenger came to report to Mike. The messenger was sent by Kevin territory. He said that Lord Kevin was almost dying, and he also said that Lily Bill would go back to inherit the position of Lord of Bill territory. It is not uncommon for women to inherit the position of Lord. Just like Kevin territory now, there is no male heir, so Lily can only go back to inherit. Otherwise, Kevin territory can only be removed from the list. The consequences of being removed are very serious. In the words of Xiaguo, it means the destruction of the country and the extinction of the race. Lily was admiring the flowers in the back garden of the castle when Mike, who came hurriedly, told her about this. She was stunned, and the feather fan in her hand slipped from her hand unconsciously and fell on the hem of her skirt. "Mike, I want to go back." This was the first sentence Lily said after she woke up. Mike was so happy about this, how could he stop her? Soon, the preparations for the trip were ready. Mike, with a solemn and heavy instruction on the surface, watched the carriage go away outside the castle. After turning around and walking into the castle, no one saw the barely visible smile on the corner of his mouth. Chapter 148 Mike's Ambition. Lily. Father is gone. Kevin lay on his back on the big bed, tilted his head, looked at Lily with tears on her face, and explained the funeral affairs with difficulty in his hoarse throat. "Father. No. Don't leave me. Don't leave Lily." Lily held Kevin's right hand tightly with her white hands. Feeling its thinness and weakness, Lily cried even more sadly. "Don't cry, Lily. Father is old, and it's time. The territory will be handed over to you in the future." Kevin stared at his daughter with his blurry eyes, recalling the dozen springs, summers, autumns and winters he had accompanied her, and then thinking of Lily's unhappy face at the wedding, and then the happy look at the end. He thought a lot, thinking about the war 2 years ago, and then looking at Lily's suppressed sadness. This must be because she was reluctant to die for him. A force came from nowhere, making Kevin's eyes clear. He seemed to know that this was his last moment. He took a deep breath, raised his left hand, and held Lily's hands tightly. His eyes were wide open, and he was full of energy, and he shouted loudly, "Lily, don't provoke the territory in the south. Remember, don't do it." As he spoke, Kevin's flushed cheeks turned pale at a speed visible to the naked eye. His strong hands gradually became weak, and his high voice became weaker. In the last moment, accompanied by his nostalgia for the mortal world, his worries about future generations, his unfinished instructions, his hands that slipped, his dead eyes, he left this world forever. "Father, Lord. Kevin's death did not have any impact on Xiaguo. After Yang Song learned the news from Chenping's intelligence, he was only surprised that he had a female neighbor. After that, he only told Chenping to pay close attention to it, and then he stopped paying attention to it. He was still busy dealing with government affairs. On the other side, Mike was writing a letter to the other 2 lords with expensive parchment. "Dear Lord Cassie Cave/Charlie Quill, Baron. You are well. I wish you good health from afar. The territory is prosperous. My wife Lily Bill has inherited the Bill territory and is now Lord Bill. This time, I ask my lord to unite the other 4 lords and 3 barons to gather an army to avenge my father. There is a territory in the south called Xiaguo. This lord is cruel and merciless. He sent troops to plunder 4 territories, destroyed cities, killed civilians, and captured lords. The lord was imprisoned, causing Lord Kevin to become ill and die. This move has violated the convention. We are in the south of the Hatanteohe Mountains. We must raise an army to attack to protect the dignity of the convention. For the lords who do not accept the words of this letter, My lord will definitely inform the mainland, and the lords of the mainland will fight together. Take this as a warning to you. Reply immediately after receiving this letter. This letter is sent to all the lords south of the Hatanteohe Mountains. Lord and Baron of Eugen territory, Mike Oz. Precious silk, crystal clear crystal cups, blood red wine, fiery liquor like white water, exquisite salt like snow and fine sand. Mike has all these treasures. This is the gift Kevin gave him, in order to get material support from him. Mike's relationship with Kevin allowed him to know a lot of secret information about the last war, so he even wanted the opponent's weapon, that could summon thunder. But he knew that he would definitely not be able to defeat the opponent with the power of his territory alone. But such a temptation was placed in front of him. How could he bear it? Therefore, Mike was waiting for an opportunity. Waiting and patience were what he was best at. Back then, he relied on patience and waiting until the end, when he suddenly exerted his strength and won the final victory in one fell swoop. And now, the opportunity he was waiting for has come. He blamed Kevin's death on the other party. This was not a far-fetched excuse, but a solid fact. According to the Continental Convention, this ignorant Zerguo leader, who knew nothing, dared to do this. He could wake up with a smile in his dreams. When Mike was a child, he went to study in those powerful territories in the middle of the continent. He knew a lot and learned a lot, especially after reading the development history of these powerful territories in a history book. His unknown ambition began to sprout. How could a small baronial territory satisfy him? But in the remote place of the Hatengteo Sea Basin, the lords of each territory all abided by the law and did not cross the line at all, which gradually extinguished his raging ambitions. At this time, such a territory emerged from nowhere. Relying on a little strength, it dared to send troops out to plunder, and even did stupid things like destroying cities and capturing lords. What he didn't expect was that the other party actually plundered 4 small territories at one time, and it was successful. From the intelligence, it was because the other party had a weapon that could summon thunder from the sky, which was very powerful. But he didn't believe that there was any weapon that could summon thunder from the sky. Even in the north of the mountains, those powerful territories didn't have such weapons. Mike analyzed all the intelligence that was summarized, and finally he came to a conclusion about this weapon. This should be a weapon with a loud noise, which sounds scary. In addition to using an attack method that makes a sound and is accompanied by flames, it can also launch a large iron ball, which has a strong power when flying quickly. The power of these 2 attack methods is very strong. The attack method of launching a large iron ball to hit people is not new. It is the same as a catapult or a crossbow, but it is a little more powerful. After all, the enemy uses precious iron to hit people, so it is reasonable to have a stronger power. But he didn't know how to understand the other attack method. It was like an iron ball, but it would explode and emit fire after landing. The power was amazing. Finally, after thinking for a long time, he couldn't figure out how this attack method was achieved. Could it be that the enemy put grease into the hollow iron ball, so even if it could catch fire, it would not explode? Could it be that something else was added? Because he couldn't figure it out, Mike wanted to get the opponent's weapon even more. He wanted to see how the opponent threw such a big iron ball, and how it would explode and catch fire. Thinking of explosions and fires, he remembered that there seemed to be a kind of stone that could speed up the burning speed of flames, and the temperature was also higher. Putting it in water would also make the water freeze. This kind of stone is produced in very small quantities. It is generally used to make ice for nobles in summer and to increase indoor temperature in winter. It is called ice and fire stone. Could it be that the opponent used this stone as a weapon? The more Mike thought about it, the more reasonable it seemed. Chapter 149, United Again. As soon as he thought of it, Mike asked his servants to take out the precious ice and fire stones, grind them into powder, and ignite them together with grease and charcoal. With a boom, the burning flames soared up to the height of a person, and the scorching temperature made him quickly move away. Ha ha ha. Mike was very happy looking at the blazing flames on the open ground. He thought he had cracked the secret of the opponent's weapon. This made Mike feel that, as long as he united with several other lords, the enemy's strength would no longer be invincible. And after reading his letter, the other lords would definitely agree to the joint troops. because the joint troops can not only maintain the majesty of the convention, but also gain considerable benefits, so the other two lords will definitely agree. As for the lords of the 4 small territories, one of them is his wife, and there is a name for revenge for her father. This time, Lily is so happy that she can't wait to object. The remaining 3 small lords have to agree under the general trend. Mike's eyes are shining with excitement, as if he has seen the celebration after defeating the enemy and collecting the spoils. After returning to the study, he wrote another letter to tell the other 2 lords that he, Mike, already had the same weapons as the enemy, and told them not to worry about the enemy's powerful weapons. After receiving Mike's 2 letters, the lords of the Bounty and the Shangdaoteri all agreed as Mike expected. Through the correspondence, they finally decided to meet in Shangdao city of Shangdao territory. The correspondence between the lords of the 3 territories was very secretive, and ordinary people had no idea that their lords had united to prepare for war. The meeting of the lords, such a big thing, could not be concealed, but there had been lord gatherings in the past, and the others were not surprised. But this time, 7 lords met together. The scale was a bit larger, and Shangdao city was particularly lively. For a small place like the Hatengtao Sea Basin, such a big event is very commendable. The conversations before and after meals and the topics in the tavern are all inseparable from this lord gathering. The correspondence between the 2 made a month pass, and it was mid-May when the 7 lords met. Mike doesn't care about the interests of the common people. He is now in the hall of the Lord's Castle in Shangdao City, giving a passionate speech in front of many lords and nobles. Dear lords, I believe you have received a letter from this lord, otherwise there would be no gathering today. This lord's wife, Lily Bill, has now inherited Bill County and become a lord. Mike stood on the steps and raised his right hand to Lily beside him. Lily also followed Mike's introduction and saluted to everyone present. But the previous lord of Bill County, Lord Lily, and this lord's father, was brutally killed by the brutal territory in the south. Mike said, his face full of anger, and Lily also covered her face with her hands, secretly sad, extremely sad. Mike's anger was acted out, but Lily's expression was real. He took a deep breath, as if to suppress the anger in his heart, whispered to Lily and comforted her, and continued his speech. According to the rules of the Continental Convention, wars between territories cannot intentionally harm the lords of the other side. But the Zaya Lord in the south dared not to follow the rules, captured Lord Kevin, and made him seriously ill, leading to his death. According to the provisions of the convention, we must join forces to attack this unruly territory. Mike's speech was well founded, and the facts were in front of everyone, so there was no room for rebuttal. At the end of the speech, Mike took Lily and bowed to the many dignitaries present. After standing up, Mike said loudly in a sad voice, "I hope you will help us with all your strength and help us get revenge." Lily also had tears on her face and said sincerely in a sad voice, "Please help us. Lord Oz and Lord Bill, don't worry, it is necessary to maintain the dignity of the convention. This lord will definitely send a large army to avenge you." The one who said this was a muscular man who was holding up the lord's gorgeous clothes on his body. He was patting his chest with a look of peace of mind. But from the tattoo on his neck and his appearance, if it weren't for his clothes, I would have thought he was here to collect protection fees. "Thank you, Lord Quill. With your help, there is no chance of winning this time." Mike looked over and saw that it was Baron Charlie Quill, the Lord of the Boanting Territory. He was overjoyed and immediately thanked him. Boanting Territory is the territory with the strongest army among all the territories present. It is located at the intersection of 2 mountain ranges in the west. The entire territory is full of deep mountains and old forests, and there is no flat land. Therefore, there is not much land for cultivation. Most of the people in the territory make a living by hunting. In such an environment, the civilians in Quill Territory all have good archery skills. The strong body trained by hunting in the mountains and down the mountains is of course not weak in close combat, but the civilians in this territory are a bit stubborn and always talk about fists and not reason. Although they had communicated with each other a long time ago, Mike was still very excited after hearing the other party's statement in person, and thanked him again and again. Since even Lord Quill has participated, how can I, the host, be left out? Although I don't have Lord Quill's powerful army, I have money. I will pay some military expenses for the coalition forces. In addition, I will hire 5,000 mercenaries to join the war." Listening to this heroic speech, Mike's mouth twitched unnaturally. He didn't need to look to know who said this. The fat lord of Shangdao territory, Cassie Cave. Mike turned his head and looked at Cassie Cave, who was 6 feet tall and 6 feet waistline. His face was full of fat and people couldn't find his neck. Looking at his jewels from head to toe, there was only one word for him: heroic. Mike resisted the urge to wash his eyes and tried to build up his emotions before expressing his gratitude to Cassie Cave. "Thank you Lord Cave for your support. I'm very grateful. With your financial support, victory is just a matter of waving your hand." He was worried about the high cost of ice and firestones. Even though he knew that this weapon was very powerful, the high price of the raw materials made him feel nervous. Now with Lord Cave's military funding support, this problem will no longer be a problem. Haha. Lord Oz, what are you talking about? This is just a small amount of money. It's not worth mentioning. Not worth mentioning. Cave looked at the lords present with a smug look on their faces, full of envy and jealousy, and couldn't help but become even more proud. If anyone else said this, it would be pretending, but when it came out of Cave's mouth, it was so natural and so reasonable. The Shangdao territory occupies the strategic point between the north and the south, and has started the business of collecting tolls. In addition, the lords of all generations still have some business acumen. Even if the wealth accumulated over the years is placed in the north of the mountains, it can be regarded as a wealthy place. Now the 3 major territories have expressed their opinions, not to mention Lily from Bill's territory. The other 3 small lords also immediately agreed to this coalition. Come on, everyone, please raise your glasses. Cheers to our common goal, to the coalition, and to the convention. Mike happily raised his glass and invited. For the convention. Cheers. Everyone echoed in unison, and everyone had a happy smile, as if it was really for the convention. But in fact, what it was for, only they themselves knew. Chapter 150 Zaya State prepares for war. Of course, the information about the gathering of lords in Shangdao territory could not escape Chenping's intelligence network. Through the training of people in this world, they established large and small taverns in various territories. After years of operation, they are now an important source of intelligence for Xiaguo. Although he didn't know what these forces gathered to discuss, Chenping came to a not so good conclusion after many analyses. Your Majesty, information from outside the path came that 7 lords held a gathering in Shangdao City. In the study room of the monarch's mansion, Chenping presented a memorial to Yang Song with both hands, and after Yang Song took it, he immediately bowed. Yang Song took the memorial and immediately flipped through it and asked while reading, "Really? What happened?" He saw Chenping's serious face and had a bad premonition in his heart. Chenping's face was serious, and he replied in a heavy tone, "Reply to your Majesty. Yes, according to my analysis, the 7 territories outside the pass gathered for the coalition, and the coalition's target must be us." Sure enough, Chenping's answer surprised Yang Song. He didn't expect that these forces in the north would unite again. Wasn't the lesson last time enough? Yang Song thought about it and asked directly, "How many troops does the enemy have?" As the word enemy came out, the entire north outside the pass on his small map turned red, which was a symbol of hostility. Chenping bowed and apologized. "I'm guilty. The enemy's military strength is not known for the time being, but I estimate that there are at least 30,000. When Yang Song heard this number, he was shocked again. This number is a bit scary. Originally, he knew a lot about military affairs, because he knew the importance of the army, so he worked hard to learn. Now, not to mention, being comparable to any famous general, at least he has entered the door. During this period of time, he was thinking about the army of Zaya State. Now he heard that there were more than 30,000 troops coming, which made him very worried. Yang Song found that there were still many problems with the army of Zaya State. For example, the combat effectiveness of the regular infantry brigade and the guard brigade was too different, and the equipment was not unified. Needless to say, the weapons and equipment of the regular infantry brigade led by D. King were well armed, but the equipment of the guard brigade was a little worse. There were not enough artillery, no heavy cavalry, and an extra archer. As a result, the pressure on logistics support was much greater. Yang Song also calculated the ratio of the army and the people in Zaire. The total population of 300,000 was 100 to 1 or even several hundred to 1 in peacetime, and the most brutal 10 to 1 in wartime. But he decided to adopt a ratio of 30 to 50 to 1 that would not affect development, that is, to have 6,000 to 10,000 troops. The current strength of Zaire, including his guard battalion, reached 8,100 people, which was just right, not more or less. After calculating, he was still very satisfied. Although he had not thought about and calculated the number of troops before, the development of Zaire made him unconsciously follow this ratio. He was very satisfied at first, but now there are a large number of enemies attacking, and he was not so satisfied all of a sudden. The comparison of the enemies and my military strength is more than 3 to 1. Yeah? It's only 3 to 1. There is not much difference. Thinking of this, Yang Song first waved his hand at Chen Ping, who was bending over to apologize, and said, "This is not your fault. Such a thing must be premeditated. Now you can get this information in advance. You have already made a contribution. How can you be guilty?" After Chen Ping thanked him and stood up straight, he continued to ask, "I ask you, when will the enemy attack?" Chen Ping replied, "Your Majesty, the beating of the 7 territories was 5 days ago. Even if the enemy immediately sent troops and gathered together, it would take 5 days to arrive at the city of Bi. By the time we reach the Xianqian Pass, we still have at least 7 days. In this era, there is no radio, let alone telephones. Being able to know the enemy's movements so many days in advance is already a remarkable ability." When Yang Song heard Chen Ping say that the enemy was gathering more troops, his eyes lit up and he asked, "It will take so long for the enemy to arrive. Can we strike first and defeat them one by one, just like we did in the past when we conquered the southern barbarians?" Chen Ping smiled bitterly and shook his head and replied, "Your Majesty, the situation this time is a little different. The same tactics will not work. First of all, the time we were given to prepare was too short. By the time we sent troops outside the pass, the enemy was already waiting for us outside the passage." After answering Yang Song's question, Chen Ping explained why this tactic would not work. Secondly, the enemy has made sufficient preparations. Even if our army leaves the passage, it will only fall into the enemy's encirclement. That's true. When Yang Song heard this, he knew that he couldn't take the initiative to attack this time. Finally, the enemy is numerous, and we are few, but we have the natural barrier of Xianqian Pass. The enemy is far away, and we are close. Our army has the advantage of time, place, and people. We just need to defend Xianqian Pass. Although the area behind the pass is our territory, because of this, our army is not afraid of the enemy's siege. Every time Chen Ping said a point, Yang Song nodded. After Chen Ping finished explaining, Yang Song agreed and said, "It's true. Xianqian Pass has built 2 walls, and we are not afraid of enemy attacks. In that case, let the ignorant enemy experience what a real natural barrier is at Xianqian Pass." Yang Song also figured it out. "Since you are not quiet, don't blame me for bullying you by relying on weapons and equipment. Your Majesty's order. The guard battalion and the infantry brigade will immediately enter the Xianqian Pass and prepare for defense. Your Majesty's order. Yang Zhen of the military bureau will mobilize the militia. The number is 20,000. Your Majesty's order. Yang Ren of the rear security bureau will make logistical preparations to ensure the supply of weapons and ammunition in the front." Yang Song wrote down several orders on the spot. Finally, he handed a letter of order to Chen Ping and said, "This is an order for you." Chen Ping took the order with both hands solemnly. Before he opened it, he heard Yang Song say to him, "No need to read it. I will dictate it to you. Your Majesty's order. Continue to do a good job of collecting intelligence on the enemy. Remember not to miss any clues, especially to find out how many troops the enemy has, what kind of weapons and equipment they have, and what kind of people are in command." Yang Song also knew some characteristics of the civilization of this world, such as the fact that military command is not decided by one person, and launching a war is like a child's play, as if there is no experience of the cruelty of war. Just like last time, more than 10,000 soldiers were killed in the battle, and it is unknown how many civilians died. 2 citizen castles were also destroyed, and 2 lords were imprisoned. What was the result? After the war, those lords lived their lives as usual, as if nothing had happened. This was actually Yang Song's illusion. He didn't know that Kevin was frightened to death by Zhao Guo. But even if he knew this, he would not be happy about it, because war always brings sorrow. Moreover, this alliance was led by the other 3 big territories. Otherwise, no one in the 4 small territories would want to be his enemy, except Lily, who wanted revenge. In fact, Yang Song was quite depressed. You said that he was farming and building a home, and by the way, he turned 2 well-behaved little maids into wives and had children. He didn't know how comfortable he was at home day by day, and now someone came to beat him up, and he didn't provoke anyone. Why did they all come to bully him? They really thought he was made of mud, and any territory could come and pinch him. Yang Song's inner anger was already more than depression, and he looked at the task hanging high. Since you don't want me to have a good life, then I will make sure you don't get it. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.